This is still Newsroom, reloaded. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, is Evan Janssen, and the show is live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we also stream live on YouTube right now, with the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Today we go in a totally different direction, that is. The show has grown and so has the cast, from what you can see. We're going for 3 hours instead of the 1 hour that you've seen before. We've congealed. Pretty much. Become one with the AM News team, and we're going to broadcast between 9 and 12 every day. Kendall Machamate and Elvis Preslin, who you know as the anchors of the AM News team, well, they've joined us. Kendall is still going to man the sports desk, and Elvis Preslin is the man who's going to give us news in real time, on the hour, every hour throughout the show. Then we've got Anine Dormel, who you know from Newsroom before. Anine will be taking on different roles. She'll be manning the social media desk. But before we get to all of that, Paul Monaro has just slipped in here under the radar, as he always does.
Always, eh?
Why is it so easy for you to get in under the radar?
It's because I move with the molecules.
So Paul is doing a specialized slot for us every Thursday. It's going to be something totally different, something that we haven't really tried in the news business. It's going to be called Whether or Not with Paul Monaro. And Paul, just tell us what the kind of things that we're going to be looking forward to.
Yeah, we'll be looking at a whole lot of interesting stuff. Anything sustainability, environmental, travel, tourism, weather, extreme events. And you see a bit later on, we'll also be touching on some of the weather phenomena that's taking place and explaining why it is actually so hot right now, and why we're expecting the droughts, and also a host of other things. How to save the planet in terms of saving on fuel, saving electricity, and saving us from the end of the world.
Saving us from ourselves. That is Paul's brief. 10:45 on the show is when we go live with Paul in a slot we'd like to call Whether or Not with Paul Monaro. A little bit of fun that we have with the environment, but very serious stuff. Kendall, what's your expectation, though, going forward with Newsroom?
Newsroom is going to be a cracker of a show. We're expecting to do an in-depth analysis of all the sports that happens. Tonight we've got matches that are happening in Telkom knockout. But last night we had UEFA Champions League matches. Rooney missing a sitter, and we also, bigger than that, the Springboks have got a brand new coach to take them through to the rest of the World Cup.
Captain,
so we'll be covering all of that.
Captain, brand new captain.
Well,
everybody wants a brand new coach. I know that. It's ingrained.
Power of note, wasn't it?
It's ingrained in all of us. But Elvis, you're the man that's going to bring us news in real time. Change the dynamic of the news on the show a little bit.
Completely, Eben. It's about the news, it's about the reviews, it's about the analysis. And how do we cover and bring those stories to you, the viewer that is, and to make sure that we also hear your voice. We want to include you into the show. You are becoming one and with us on this particular show. 3 hours, that is. You don't have to miss a thing. Stay with us. 404. This is the channel to be. Newsroom. That's the channel right here.
Thanks, Elvis. Now, we're going to release Elvis because Elvis, as you say, is going to give us news in real time. I know all of you are probably waiting for the update, first updated bulletin of the morning. Elvis, you can go and get ready to bring us up to speed. But before we go to the news, Anine, you've got a totally different role as well that you're going to be taking on. We are going to try and bring breaking news in real time in a different format, in a kind of format that's more user-friendly. People want to interact a little bit more as the world has changed a bit, isn't it?
Well, even different, but not actually so different. We're going to have a big focus on Twitter, look at our trending topics of the morning. We're going to have a discussion on that a bit later. But basically, you're going to know who to follow and what to follow.
Who to follow, what to follow. And if you really know who to follow, Paul Monaro is the guy to follow. On a molecular level, am I right?
Yeah, if you can keep up, go for it. But yeah.
Oh, guys, fantastic. This is the new sort of Newsroom Outlook. We're going to be broadcasting live between 9 and 12 every morning. We're going to bring you updated news, current affairs, the who's who behind stories and so forth. And also try and interact with you in real time. Give you a platform to really participate in what we do. That is the secret. That is what Newsroom is all about. You get a look at us, and hopefully we'll get a look at you. But let's get an update. Today's news with Elvis Preslin.
In your news today, Eskom tries to reassure consumers as a strike in the coal mining sector looms. The roads must fall movement disrupts a lecture by the French economist Thomas Piketty at the University of Cape Town. And as you heard it from Kendall, veteran scrum half Fourie de Preer named as the new Bok captain. Those are all your headlines. Our top story this hour. Eskom says a looming strike in the coal sector will not have an immediate impact on their ability to supply power. The utility says most of its power stations have a month's stockpile. The National Union of Mine Workers earlier said it would give coal companies a 48-hour strike notice after wage talks collapsed. Eskom spokesperson Kule Pasiwe says they have enough stock to last them 30 days should there be a strike. However, he says the energy supplier wouldn't want a situation where there's a stoppage in the supply of coal. Meanwhile, the National Union of Mine Workers chief negotiator Peter Bailey has confirmed that NUM will give coal companies a 48-hour strike notice following the collapse of the wage talks. The union had been demanding 50% wage hikes but scaled back to 13%. The Chamber of Mines says it raised its offer to 8.5% for the lowest paid workers, and Bailey says 30,000 workers may embark on a strike. Bailey spoke to SABC News last night.
I must first outline the process for you. In any dispute that arises, when a certificate of unresolved is issued, what then happens is that the other party who receives the certificate is compelled by the Labour Relations Act to give a 48-hour notification. That 48-hour notification, only when it lapses does the other party go on strike. So you can't commence on a strike before that. So I don't know where the conflicting views come from that the certificate, the notice is not going to be issued. The notice is certainly going to be issued. What is the issue here for us? Maybe the issue of the timing. Because it's Wednesday today, the earliest we can issue the notification is tomorrow. And after that, it will be running into the weekend. So we'll decide whether we issue it tomorrow or we issue it on Monday morning.
The Rhodes Must Fall movement at the University of Cape Town disrupted a lecture by the French economist Thomas Piketty yesterday. Now, due to Piketty missing his plane on Tuesday night, the lecture was scheduled to take place over Skype. But right before it started, members of the Rhodes Must Fall movement came into the lecture room and disrupted the proceedings. Piketty is scheduled to deliver a series of lectures before the 13th annual Nelson Mandela Lecture on Saturday. Piketty missed his plane because he reportedly did not have the required amount of free pages in his passport. He's now expected to arrive in South Africa this morning. The Wits University Vice-Chancellor, Professor Adam Habib, says that government has no will to transform historically black universities. Now, he was speaking at the 8th Imam Abdullah Harun Memorial Lecture in Cape Town last night.
Imam Abdullah Harun, a Muslim cleric, a leader, and so much more. Brutally murdered, he died in detention. He is remembered for the sacrifices he made in ensuring that all live in harmony.
Would he not have asked why universities receive only 22 billion rand in subsidy when the government's own task team says that at the global average they should be funded at 37 billion rand? Would he not have asked why is it that so many of our institutions remain racial enclaves?
Privileged universities were also used as examples where black students still feel culturally ostracized, causing student upsurge.
The children of rich parents land up going to Wits, UCT, Stellenbosch. The ones who land up at Walter Sisulu, the University of Zululand, Fort Hare, tend to be the children of the poorest within our communities. And until now, government has lacked the will or the imagination, despite all of its political rhetoric, to develop these historically black universities.
The Imam Abdullah Harun Trust says it's doing all it can to change the lives of the underprivileged, but need more donors to come forward and assist. Nomao Tusolwandle, SABC News, Cape Town.
The University of KwaZulu-Natal has again suffered disruptions. Protest action on the Edgewood campus turned violent yesterday and there were minor disruptions on the Pietermaritzburg campus. Academic activity at the university resumed on Monday following 2 weeks of closure due to violent protest. The students were unhappy over the termination of the Registration Appeals Committee, which was a forum for them to make arrangements for the payment of outstanding tuition fees while continuing with their studies. The Minister in the Presidency, Jeff Radebe, says that he's not upset by the hostile reception that he got when accepting a memorandum from the anti-corruption groups at the Union Buildings in Pretoria yesterday. Members of the United Against Corruption coalition booed him when he received the document. A second march was held in Cape Town.
A united stand against corruption. The message: boost efforts to combat corruption. The demands of the marchers include annual lifestyle audits of senior government officials, protection of whistleblowers and Chapter 9 institutions.
We're doing so not because we are angry against anybody, not because we're gaining any form of publicity, not because we have nothing else to do, not because we are stressed. We're doing so because we love our country, South Africa.
Minister Radebe accepted the memorandum on behalf of government. However, he was greeted with resounding boos.
Unite Against Corruption Coalition.
There's a law now that has been passed by Parliament and assented to by the President of it barring civil servants from doing business with government. So that's a reflection of our commitment in fighting the scourge of corruption.
Another anti-corruption march led by NUMSA and workers is on the cards for next month. Sepho Stirman, SABC News, Pretoria.
Now that's your local news for now. In News International, the US and Russian military will hold talks as soon as possible to avoid clashing during operations in Syria. The announcement came hours after Russia launched airstrikes in the country yesterday.
Secretary Carter stopped short of confirming that Russian warplanes had targeted anti-Assad forces in their strike on the Syrian city of Homs.
I want to be careful about confirming information, but it does appear that they were in areas where there probably were not ISIL forces, and that is precisely one of the problems with this whole approach.
He said the US position was clear, that a lasting defeat of the Islamic State and other extremist groups in Syria could only be achieved in parallel to a political restructuring in the country.
If Russia's recent actions and those now ongoing reflect a genuine commitment to defeat that organization, then we are prepared to welcome those efforts and to find a way to deconflict our operations and thereby multiply the military pressure on ISIL and affiliated groups. But we must not and will not be confused in our fight against ISIL with support for Assad.
The Defense Secretary has also strongly criticized the way that Russia informed the US of its plans to begin these airstrikes.
This is not the kind of behavior that we should expect professionally from the Russian military professionally, and that's one reason why I think it's a good thing to have an avenue of communication that is less unprofessional than a drop-in.
Kate Fisher, SABC News, Washington.
Now that's your news for now. You have to stay tuned for more a little bit later, but right now it's over to Eben Janssen.
Thank you very much, Elvis. Yes, Elvis will be back with us at the top of the hour, 10 o'clock, to give us another updated roundup of the news in South Africa, the continent, and the wider world. Now, Anine Domel is standing by right now. Anine, you've been scouring the social media threads this morning to tell us what people are passionate about and what they are twittering and talking about. Just give us a quick update.
Well, yeah, Ben, in this morning's top 10 trending topics on Twitter, we see Oxover doing the rounds, ecomobility, and of course, we saw the return of the Roads Must Fall members again. Of course, earlier, the Roads Must Fall hashtag made its rounds on Twitter. This after we saw the members of that movement disrupting the world-renowned economic Thomas Piketty's lecture that he was supposed to deliver at the University of Cape Town. Unfortunately, he had to miss his flight, and he was going to do this via Skype. Now, before that actually happened, we saw the members walking into the lecture. Unfortunately, we're going to have to see if we can get an update from the Nelson Mandela Foundation on when his tour will now officially start in South Africa, because he had a few problems with his passport. But definitely, hashtag Rhodes Must Fall, that's back. We thought when the statue was taken down in April, we won't see that hashtag again. That's not the case. Then moving to eco-mobility, if you are living and working in Sandton, then you might have thought that you would have to get on a bike today. You might have had to start walking today. That unfortunately is not the case, since the city of Johannesburg says, well, you know, that's only going to happen on Monday. So if you were excited about that, just remember, follow hashtag ecomobility to get the latest news on when exactly all of those changes will be taking place in the CBD there in Sandton. And then lastly, it is the start of October, which means you're going to see October trending on Twitter. Definitely one of the most talked about topics on Twitter this morning. That's all about not drinking throughout the month of October. If you want to register and be part of this campaign, you can go to october.com.au. You can register and take up this challenge. Of course, throughout the morning, I'll be letting you know where all our journalists are going to be, what the other topics are. We've got Frida Priya, we've got Pia Buerta. I'll be talking a bit more about that. And we've got Rooney on the sports front trending. And Kendall is obviously going to go into all of those sports news. So yes, just follow us at SABC Newsroom to see where our journalists will be. And you can also follow me at Anindi.
Thank you very much, Janine. Well, this week, the South African Police Service released their crime statistics for 2015, and despite a decrease in illegal possession of firearms, the overall violent crimes rate have increased. Gun-Free South Africa stated that firearm-related fraud and corruption has channeled guns into the wrong hands, which is fueling the violent crime we see in South Africa. Statistics show that 18 people are shot and killed every day in South Africa. But how do we compare to other nations, and what can we learn from their gun laws? Joining us from our Pretoria studios is the director of the Flemish Peace Institute, Thomas Baum. A very good morning to you. Mr. Baum spoke at a conference last night on gun laws in Europe. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Last night you presented your report on gun laws and related crimes in Europe. Tell us about the most concerning findings from your research.
I think there are three findings. One finding is that there is indeed a correlation between the availability of guns in a society and the death rate, both homicide and suicide, linked to that. Second conclusion would be that in Europe we have a much more problem of suicide with firearms than homicide. We have every year throughout the European Union, which comprises 500 million people, only 1,000 homicides, which is not too much with firearms, which is not too much compared with the rest of the world. But we have 5,000 suicides a year with firearms. So this would be another finding.
Here in South Africa, we believe that gun ownership is part of the idea that fuels the violent deaths. In your research, is there a direct link?
That's a complicated question because a lot depends on the context. So you have firearms that are legally held with a good cause. For example, people who own a gun for hunting, for sports, collection. And when this normal or let's say acceptable activity is regulated well, this works fine. Then you have the entire illegal problematic of people smuggling in guns, making their own guns, stealing guns from police or civilians. And that's the illegal problematic. Now, they have links, but when it comes to the sort of deaths, I think you see two main findings. These legally held guns are abused for suicide in Europe then, but also for, let's say, domestic violence in the sense of shooting in a kind of a partner relationship or a passionate crime, if you would like to say. Whereas the criminal circuit on robberies and so on is a different one using the illegal gun. So the status of a gun becomes important, but one should not forget, of course, that the gun itself has a typical character of lethality and damage that is more developed than in other instruments. I mean, it's more noxious than a knife, or more effective, if you like, than a knife.
We've changed the gun licensing process here in South Africa. Some say due to corruption it is also problematic. How do you address the issue of corruption in Europe, and what should we be on the lookout here in South Africa?
Okay. Yeah. But we also have our cases. For example, we had more in Belgium specifically a restriction of gun laws in 2006. And there was an amnesty period. This often combined when you have a strict legislation, you allow people who have guns to then deliver them. And we also had cases of police officers just selling the things that they got from the citizens to other criminal activity. So it's not a South African problem as such, I think. Police forces and defense forces should be of good quality and be responsible and well governed. This is one thing, of course, that's very important. I think that government itself can also take technical measures in registration, in very well taking stock very well of what official owns what gun, and not be too condoning of loss and theft in this area. These are very pragmatic little efforts. I think on the whole, one has to have good data. Of course, I'm a researcher, but the data is very important because this allows you to have a good picture of the problem. And the gun problematic and the relation with gun deaths is in every society a bit different, and you just need very good analysis to actually know what's the problem. And as I heard, the South African problem is with handguns more than with hunting rifles, let's say.
What is the lesson that South Africa should learn with regards to this and with regards to our legal framework when dealing with guns, both legal and illegal?
Well, I must say, I think the existing legislation is in a sense, principally rather good. You have the reason, the good cause for having a gun is well developed. I think the main challenge would be then implementation, and then both ways. Implementation of making sure that those who legally own guns are well controlled, responsible and well checked on the one hand, and otherwise investing in combating the illegal trade. And as I said, for both activities, you really need a good intelligence picture. You really need to know what the issues are in your own society.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Very insightful comments there from Thomas Bown, who's the director of the Flemish Peace Institute. He's on a speaking tour here in South Africa talking about gun laws, the gun laws in Europe compared to our gun laws, and what are the lessons that we can learn from Europe and they can maybe learn from us. A very interesting topic during this week that, well, we've come to terms with the fact that 49 people are murdered in South Africa every day, 18 of those at the point of a gun. Now, we move on. In a bid to combat crime, Cape Town wants to declare crime hotspots as disaster zones. And this is in response to what it called the ongoing failure of policing there in the city. The city is currently seeking legal opinion which will treat identified crime hotspots like any other disaster zones by deploying more police and other resources to prevent crime. The latest crime statistics, Western Cape showed an increase in most contact crime categories such as murder, attempted murder and robberies, making it the province with the second highest crime rate after Gauteng. Reacting to the crime statistics, Western Cape Acting Police Commissioner Major General Tembisile Patekile says they will intensify efforts to make the province safer. And now, joining us from Cape Town is J.P. Smith, the Mayoral Committee Member, Safety and Security there. Very good morning to you, J.P. Thanks for joining us again.
Morning, Evan.
Just give us an overall, it's a topical scenario this week, but give us an overall outlook of the situation in Cape Town and surrounds at the moment.
Eben, I must confess part of your question was obscured by another audio feed, but the situation with our crime stats is that many of the key categories of crime that most affect people, aggravated robbery at their houses, robbery, the contact crimes of assault common, assault GBH, and of course attempted murder and murder are all up, very concerning. And I think I've gotten to the point where I can no longer face communities and say to them, we're not in control of the police. It's a national competency. They answer only to national government. We control Metro Police. That's 3% of the police. So, we must wrestle with national government to make it better. That's just not good enough. So I've gotten to the point where we must seek every possible angle. And a big part of our problem with our policing in the province is policing methodology, the lack of effective training, the under-resourced the status, the lack of specialized units. And that leads to your 2% conviction rate on critical issues like your gang violence. And as we saw in the Kailicha Commission of Inquiry, a 3% conviction rate for serious contact crimes, including sexual crimes. That's a serious crisis. And then secondly, it's due to severe resource starvation. The vast majority of our police stations are significantly under-resourced, and the majority of the vacancies in the police in South Africa sit in the Western Cape. So we have this crisis, and that means we must start taking those measures that we can. Declaring these areas disaster areas would allow us to pull in additional emergency resources and push in additional policing resources like we did with the stabilization unit in Manenberg. And what this would allow us to do is extend that initiative to other suburbs to make them safer as well.
Now, this is an ongoing process that you're talking about. How far really right now is the city with these proposed plans?
Well, the legal opinion was authorized last week by the mayor. That's gone to senior legal advisors who will present us with an opinion in a few weeks. We'll know where we stand and what we can do. And of course, part of that is to ask whether we can compel or meaningfully engage national government around them contributing to this, remembering that crime prevention is their core function. They have exclusive control over the entire criminal justice system. Neither province nor the city controls any of that. We have a tiny contribution in terms of Metro Police, but that's not going to solve the problem. So we are saying, can we pull national government to the table and look at getting meaningful interim policing resources out of them until they fix their longer-term resourcing levels, which are just far beyond the pale. They talk about deployment ratios of 1 to 360, 380 across the country, but at our worst affected police stations, we see deployment ratios of 1 policeman to every 1,300, and in one case, even 1 to 1,000, 1 to 3,000 people. So our ratios of police to the public in the Western Cape at the hands of national government is severely under-resourced. And in the interim, I'm going to try and fix that through disaster declaration. In fact, the strange thing is not that I'm asking for it, but that more cities aren't taking steps like this, because, quite frankly, to have, floated back up to a 36 murders per 100,000 ratio is certainly not a good thing. It's not a good thing for investments. It's not a good thing for happy communities. Not a good thing for job creation.
Well, you mentioned about your interventions in Manenberg, the like. We've seen Operation Fiela. We've seen Shot Spot and all these kinds of interventions going on. What's been the success rate of these interventions? And then if you compare it with a disaster zone tactic, do you see that being more successful?
Well, if we were able to pull more resources to the table, even through declaring these areas of disasters and being able to draw on contingency funding then, and perhaps compelling such contingency funding from national government, we would extend the stabilization unit that we rolled out in Manenberg to other suburbs. We went from a situation over several months there where we had 1 to 3 shootings a day, and we've now had, over a period of 9 weeks, we've had, I think, 5 or 6 shootings only. So a dramatic stabilization and calming of the violence there, through the deployment of these, 45 stabilization unit members in the area all the time, and another 45 that are moving into that and other suburbs and supporting SABC and the military's Operation Fiela. So I want to extend that initiative to many more suburbs. The crime stats now clearly guide us on where the worst of those hotspots are. I wish we had the stats on a month-by-month basis or a day-by-day basis, which is what we should have, what you have in the rest of the modern world, because then, if you're bringing your aeroplane into a foggy airport, you have equipment that guides you in and tells you where the airstrip is. And unfortunately, we're expected to fly that aeroplane without any of that equipment, and once we crash land on the runway, then they run over and say, oh, by the way, here's the equipment. So we need the crime stats on a day-to-day basis to be able to make sure that we can adjust our deployment accordingly. But that said, we can extend this to many other suburbs. And it's not just the short-term intervention, because that would be short-sighted. It is making sure that we start those medium-term interventions, like we're doing with the Mayor's Urban Regeneration Program and violence prevention through urban upgrading in Hanover Park and Manenberg, to extend significant upgrades of your infrastructure, upgrades of your trading and commercial hubs in those areas so that they're safer, better illuminated, better constructed, that you've got crime prevention through environmental design built into those areas, and to extend that to many more suburbs. Additional resources would allow us to fast-track that.
JP Smith, I thank you for joining us today. That's the Mayoral Committee member, Safety and Security, City of Cape Town. Of course, everybody has a duty in dealing with crime, especially communities. All of us, we need to pull together. All interventions are necessary. We move on, as we always do on Newsroom. The Roads Must Fall movement yesterday disrupted interrupted the annual Nelson Mandela Foundation lecture at the University of Cape Town, calling the audience and panelists hypocritical. Speaking to Newsroom this morning, Chumani Magwele said, as a movement, they don't see yesterday's turn of events as a disruption, but they see it as a platform to voice their frustrations as the university closed the transformation debate. Now, our question of the day relates to that, and you can, of course, interact with us. Those are the pictures that came through. There's our question of the day. Again, what is your view on the Rhodes Must Fall disruption last night? Yes, it has been an ongoing campaign. Let's take a quick look at what some of the views are with regards to this intervention. John Ellis says, Rhodes Must Fall, students disrupting UCT classes again. How about a Students Must Study campaign? Hashtag Rhodes Must Fall. That's a legitimate question, John Ellis. Mark Akel says, how do we solve PE fair, but the wealth factor is still greater than the income, so we need to implement policy, talking directly to the hashtag Rhodes Must Fall. Kagiso Rampu says, I would expect black young people on Twitter to be engaging the crucial issues these comrades keep raising. Kagiso, maybe they don't support what these people are doing. Then John Ellis is back. He said, Rhodes Must Fall students. How about a Students Must Study campaign? We've had that one before, that one from John Ellis. Those are some of the views that we see coming in on the Rhodes Must Fall campaign. We all have a little bit of history there, but let's move on and take a look at the picture of the day. There we have our picture of the day. This one from Brian Kamanzi at Rhodes Must Fall, interrupt the Thomas Piketty talk that never was. At Jameson Hall at UCT, of course, Mr. Piketty is on his way to South Africa today after, he had some passport problems on him before he boarded a flight in Europe to come to South Africa to do the lecture. He's expected to be in the country sometime later today. Now, let's take a look at the front pages of newspapers from around the globe. What is in the news elsewhere? We start in Europe. The Times reports that Russian jets bombed Western-backed rebels in Syria yesterday after ordering American military planes out of the country's airspace. Then we move to China, where the South China Morning Post says a new explosion rocked Lucheng County in China's southwestern Guangxi province. That was this morning, a day after a series of bombs hidden in parcels exploded and killed at least 7 people and injured dozens and dozens more. Then finally, in New York, the International New York Times reports that the World Health Organization issued sweeping new guidelines yesterday that could put millions more people on HIV drugs. Those are your international headlines, just some of them. Let's take a quick look at what's happening around the country. We start in KwaZulu-Natal, where President Jacob Zuma's nephew, minibus taxi boss Mfundo Kaba, along with 10 others, are expected back in the Durban Magistrates Court today. The accused were arrested following a shooting at the Brook taxi rank, which left 3 people dead, including an innocent commuter. The men have claimed to have acted in self-defense and denied being members of both the Sonke and Zamukuhle taxi associations. Then, in Cape Town, a Tableview police official is due in court today for allegedly helping a suspect evade arrest. The captain faces charges of defeating the ends of justice. The charges relate to an incident that happened at the weekend when 2 other officers tried to arrest a man in Kraaifontein for having an unlicensed firearm in his possession. Still in Cape Town, judgment in the Winelands e-tolling case is expected to be handed down a little bit later today. We'll keep you updated on this very channel how that pans out. Time for us to take a break, though. You're watching Newsroom right here on SABC News.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
We live in a digital era, and the number of Africans with mobile phones is rapidly increasing.
Twitter use is predominantly being done on smartphones. This is a very African phenomenon.
Here, there are constantly new innovative ways to make the internet more affordable. With that, we're seeing protests against governments proposing methods to limit access. On Network, we give you information about all of this. We also have new computers, games, and robots.
Join Siphumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 19:30 CAT.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. Now, the wage negotiation in the gold sector under the guidance of the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, that's the CCMA, has been rescheduled for a little bit later today and tomorrow, Friday. The conciliation process was rescheduled, taking into account the availability of all parties, including the appointed CCMA councillors. Now, last month, gold producers tabled revised offers in respect of wages to unions for the period 1 July 2015 to the 30th of June 2018. Mining analysts have predicted protracted talks after major trade unions, AMCU, and the NUM tabled demands of more than 80% for its lowest paid members in the context of depressed global commodity prices. Now, for the latest on the gold talks, we are joined by our very own economics reporter, Mbongeni Mutwa, who is with us here in studio this morning. Mbongeni, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us once again. Good morning. The CCMA is already involved in this process. What's your expectation of today?
Well, I think the big thing today that we expect is that NUM is likely to accept the offer that's on the table. Of course, they are the official majority in the gold sector. And for the past 2 weeks, all the unions, well, especially NUM and AMCU, have been consulting their members about the last offer that the employers tabled 2 weeks ago, which basically ranges between 600 and 800 rand increases, but which would be part of basic salaries. Our sense is that NUM is going to accept. They are going to join Solidarity and WASA, the two smaller unions, who have been itching to sign for quite some time now. Yeah. That's going to have very interesting implications for central bargaining in the gold sector, which has been there, a permanent feature for decades. Yeah. But also, if AMCU doesn't accept, which we don't expect they will, then we might see them maybe going on strike alone, but not in all the gold mines, especially at Sibanye, where they are a majority there.
You mentioned that the NUM, they are on the verge of signing, if that's what the word is on the street. AMCU, of course, then sits outside of us, and they've always had a very tough stance on these matters. What do you expect them then to put forward a little bit later today, and how would that then, as you say, affect the overall process?
Well, basically what's going to happen is if the NUM accepts, along with Solidarity and WASA, they are going to insist that they be allowed to sign the agreement. So far, the employers have not been very clear about their latest stance regarding that, because earlier on, they were insisting that the offer that they were making on the table jointly had to be accepted by all four unions, because they didn't want the companies to be split and so on. So these three unions have been insisting that that's unfair, it doesn't make sense. If a union accepts the offer, it must be allowed to sign. So they're going to put pressure on the employers, the NUM, Solidarity and WASA, that because they have accepted, they must be allowed to sign. So now, if AMCU doesn't sign, what's likely to happen is in companies where the three unions, NUM, WASA and Solidarity, represent the majority of the workforce, the agreement can then be implemented and extended to unionized and non-unionized members. That would include AMCU members as well, because the majority of the unions have accepted. Only in companies or operations where the three unions don't represent the majority, that's where it's going to be tricky. But as far as we know, AMCU at this stage has a clear majority at Sibanye. So that's where we know that AMCU can actually strike. Yeah. So it just opens a number of...
What have been the word coming out from management at Sibanye thus far?
Management at Sibanye has said to us privately, as the negotiations are unfolding, with the unions taking different positions, of course, AMCU taking a very hard line. Management of Sibanye has said to us privately that AMCU can strike for a year or more, if they like, they would never get what they want.
Yeah.
Instead, what they would do, they would shut down the mines. They would simply shut down the mines, send everyone home. So if whether they mean that or not, I mean, it remains to be seen if we get there.
I mean, these are tough negotiations always. Every year we see these kinds of tough negotiations. But I think for the first time in many years we see a scenario where the poles are so far apart and the threats are so real within this case. Do you foresee mines being closed? Do you foresee the kinds of protracted strikes we've had at Sibanye if they're not met?
Well, I think what's different about this round of negotiations compared to previous ones is the economic situation. Not just in mining, but the economic situation in the country and the economic situation globally. As you know, commodity prices, the prices of these metals, gold and so on, have plummeted
been depressed for quite some time now.
And companies are under severe pressure. Companies are retrenching, not just ordinary workers. They are retrenching management as well at all levels. So that shows that companies are seriously under pressure. So to push for high wage negotiations in this environment doesn't make a lot of sense, and we've seen that happen with these negotiations. I mean, we started with the unions demanding 15% increases, 10,000 rands here and there. And they've now, I mean, NUM, so that was now they are ready to accept 800 rands increase. Of course, AMCU is still holding out, saying they want more than 1,000 rand increase and so on. So these are not normal times. Yesterday, the coal negotiations collapsed. The NUM has been issued a strike certificate. In coal, we understand that
48 hours, I saw.
Yes, but it would be very interesting to see if they are keen to act on the strike certificate. It's one thing to be issued a strike certificate, but if you are a sensible person, you're not going to rush into a strike under this environment, because one thing is for sure and it's guaranteed, your members will lose, many of your members will lose their jobs.
Will suffer, and cool heads, calm heads and clear heads is what is needed during these difficult economic times. Mungeni, thank you for coming in and giving us your very informed views about what's happening within the gold and also a little bit coal sector here in South Africa. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. That's
our own reporter, Mungeni Butwa. We're talking about, strike action, the threat of strike action, commodity prices, depressed economy. All these kinds of factors are at play in the negotiation process for mine workers when they deal with, when talks resume a little bit later today in the gold sector. Now, a story that's been in the news is that chaos ensued again at the University of KwaZulu-Natal yesterday, and classes were disrupted as the protest action on the Edgewood campus turned violent. Academic activity at the university resumed on Monday following 2 weeks of closure due to violent protests. The students are unhappy over the termination of the Registration Appeals Committee, which was a forum for them to make arrangements for the payment of outstanding tuition fees while continuing with their studies. It's been a matter that's been passionately supported by students. Let's take a look at what some of the views have been on social media with regards to this ongoing process there at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So New Deity says, more disruptions and protests, ? Transform UKZN. Unfortunately, this is the most transformed university in South Africa. Mbata says, UKZN never loved us. We treated as criminals, dogs, and whatever they think we are, but we will fight for what we want. Unfortunately, you are at the most transformed university in the country. What more can they do? Kuma Duncan says, Dear SAFM, we demand to know what's happening in South Africa more than US and Russia. UKZN issue is not solved as yet innocent students. Yes, we will pass that on to our to SAFM. Actually, Elvis is you should take that one up. Sine says, heads up to UKZN Westall students. Don't go to campus today. Laugh out loud. They are planning to hit people for not striking with them. Yeah, there are so many plays and players going on. Banzi says, UKZN rather spend money on private security such as Black Ants than addressing our issues. Pain of being a UKZN student. Yeah, everybody's unhappy right now around what's happening on the universities. The universities, the campuses have been turned into somewhat of a battleground. Is this a tactic? Are the students being used ahead of local government elections? What do you think? At SABC Newsroom, that's where you can tell us what you think. If those comments are really good, we'll put them up. The show is 3 hours now, so we have lots of space to interact with you. We've got lots of space you can let us know how you feel. Tell us what are the issues you're passionate about, and we'll research it, and maybe we'll even do stories on those. Now, let's move on and see what's on Newsroom's Facebook page today. Of course, National Unions of Mine Workers Chief Negotiator Peter Bailey has confirmed that the union will give coal companies a 48-hour strike notice following the collapse of wage talks with the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. Then, Botswana President Ian Khama has committed his government to prioritising the development of the Botswana nation. Khama was addressing the 49th Independence Day celebrations in the capital, Gaborone, and the flag of the State of Palestine now flies at the United Nations in New York after it was raised in an official ceremony. The move follows a General Assembly decision earlier this month, allowing for the first time in the organization's history the flags of non-member observer states to fly at the United Nations in New York. Time for us to take another break. You are watching Newsroom Extended here on SABC News.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
Across the globe, locally, and on the entire continent. Every second, every minute, and every hour. There's always a breaking story. We commit to giving you the most important, significant, and interesting news. That's why it is not a surprise that more Africans are tuning to SABC News to find out what is happening. Because when news break, we've got you covered. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. Cape Town's V&A Waterfront is expanding its emphasis on going green. This as it will start seeing the installation of more than 7,500 square meters of solar panels on 8 rooftops on key buildings on the 123-hectare property. This groundbreaking project will produce energy that could supply one day's worth of electricity to 310 average-sized households and reduce 1,610 tons of carbon emissions per year. Isn't that wonderful? We are joined from Cape Town this morning by the CEO of Sustainable Power Solutions, Axel Scholler, who will be telling us a little bit more about this exciting project. Axel, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Eben.
This is a fantastic project and a landmark one at that. 7,500 square meters of solar panels. Tell us how you're going to go about this and how you're going to implement it in the waterfront.
Well, Eben, we are really quite far ahead already. We've started middle of August, and we aim to be more or less finished with the first phase in middle of next month to middle of November. So we expect that we will be switching on about 900 kilowatts. It's a total of 1,100 kilowatts of solar modules that we're implementing, installing at the waterfront on those 8 roofs, and we will be switching on most of it by mid-November, 900 kilowatts.
It's a wonderful project, but there are always challenges with these kinds of projects, especially it being totally green and you're going to do it in the waterfront of all places. What are the challenges and what have been the reaction to what you're doing?
Yeah, true. It's really a fantastic opportunity for us, and I think, working at such a landmark commercial center such as the waterfront, you of course cannot switch anything off. Business continues, and I think that's probably one of the most significant challenges, is that you're working on a site that continuous business, and there's lots of tourism activity, lots of commercial activity. So that, I would say, was probably the biggest challenge to, have some road closures, bring cranes onto site in order to lift equipment up to roofs. We're working at height. The logistics have been quite a challenge because of there being 8 roofs and not one single project. So I would say these were really the challenges that we faced. We've been really fortunate in terms of rain, at least for ourselves, that we could really go ahead and roll out the systems as planned.
Now, Sustainable Power Solutions, you're fully fledged South African company specializing in this kind of thing. Tell us about how big the solar market is right now in South Africa, and what's your outlook in the short term?
Yeah, we are working in the commercial sector. That means, shopping malls are typically our clients, office buildings, all the commercial activities, retail stores, and I think that we probably had about 15 to 20 megawatt of solar going on roofs in the last year. And I think it's at least double this year. And I see that there's going to be a huge growth in this sector because it is essentially sustainable. It reduces your energy costs in the long term. And I expect that will be a really interesting market. Also in particular because electricity prices are going up, whereas the prices for solar have come down significantly.
And quickly, you've got 30 seconds to tell me about the appetite of other retailers and shopping centres. Are they all starting to queue up to do this?
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of interest there, and we're also busy in the Northern Cape with projects. So there's a huge interest also in Southern Africa to put solar on the roof. Also with the electricity constraints that we are facing, I think it is very clear that solar needs to go on roofs in all the urban areas and all the commercial centres.
Axel, thank you very much for joining us. That is Axel Scholler. He is the CEO of Sustainable Power Solutions. Well, they're going to turn the entire V&A waterfront into they cover all the roofs really with solar panels, and it's going to be self-sufficient, the electricity. Let's hope it's a project that all other retailers see, and they put it all over all our shopping centres. We've got so many here in South Africa. But Tsiet Simonari is standing by to give us an update, a weather update, that is. Good morning, Tsiet. It's so nice to have you back with us. Looks a bit grey there behind you. Where's that?
Yeah, this is Durban, so solar panels would be struggling this side of the world.
Yeah, they would be.
But normally it would actually work out well because there's lots of sun in KwaZulu-Natal as well, and that could be a good idea. I think what's happening in Cape Town is actually excellent, and that's the way forward. That's what we need to move into from now on.
Yeah, we're going to cover some of this stuff, but we're talking drought, and South Africa being one of the best locations for solar in the world. But give us quickly an update, weather update.
All right, let's quickly have a look at this weather now. So as I mentioned earlier on, this is Durban in KwaZulu-Natal, and it looks like it's going to be quite a rainy one for the next couple of hours. In fact, the whole of today, we are expecting rain along the eastern sides of South Africa due to the cold front that has passed by, leaving temperatures also quite low along the southern interior. And for tomorrow, slightly lesser chance of rainfall expected just along the coastal parts, cloud cover, and then the rain for the east. The west is expected to be dry, and we'll talk about the drought a bit later on. Madagascar looks like it's going to be slightly wet as well for today. This is Johannesburg for the next 5 days now. This is quite important. Take a notice at your temperatures here. 29 today, and then it starts increasing steadily up until next week, Monday. 33 degrees. Hot weather is coming up. Now, how do you sleep at night? Look at these evening temperatures, these minimums, 13, 14, and 14, smack bam in the middle of the night. So really hot conditions are coming up. So let's quickly have a look at the rest of South Africa. About 29 for Johannesburg, as I mentioned earlier today. About 27 for Mafikeng, 22 for Bloemfontein and Kimberley. If you're going to be further down towards the southern parts, cooler conditions are expected there. Beaufort West is 17, Cape Agala is 19, and then here, where even spent a lot of his time in Cape Town, temperatures around 19 degrees, partly cloudy skies are expected there. I'm not sure if he will travel up towards Namibia. Hot weather is expected there. Keetmanshoop is at 24. This is the good side of Namibia. Have a look what happens as you go further up north. Oshakati at 35 degrees, 36 towards places such as Rundu. Sunny skies expected right across the central parts of Namibia and also over Botswana, over the Kalahari Desert, as well as over Okavango Delta. Maun is at 37 degrees, 37 for Francistown as well. I don't know if any of us can actually stomach the heat that you're experiencing in Botswana. Look at Vic Falls as well, very hot at 36. Partly cloudy skies are expected for much of the interior of Zimbabwe. Harare 31. We'll talk a lot about Harare as well in terms of the drought and also the fact that we need a lot of rainfall along those parts. Now, also shifting your attention now to Mozambique. What is this? 40 degrees, hot weather for Tete, and not far off to a place such as Quiliman, also temperatures just 6 degrees less. It is expected to remain quite hot along those parts. And just along the coastal regions of Mozambique, do you expect partly cloudy skies, possibilities of rain for Maputo, the capital? Yeah, maybe a nice and moist, especially early on into the day, but the rest of the day is going to be quite hot. Temperatures into those mid-30s. Slightly cooler conditions for Fianarantsoa. This is now back into Madagascar. 29 for Uhosi, 25 for the capital, Antananarivo, and Antsirabe also at 25 degrees. So awesome weather is expected over the central part of Madagascar. That's basically it for the weather, but do stay tuned. There's lots more to come here on the Newsroom.
Thank you, Tete. Just tell me quickly, I'm going to Cape Town over the weekend. Is it going to be cold there?
Yeah, quite chilly, 19 degrees.
Yeah,
so
man, I should stay. I should be staying in Johannesburg. Thank you, Tete Manare. We'll be back with us a little bit later. We're doing an interesting segment with him called Whether or Not with Paul Manare. It's going to be quite a fun look at the environment, green issues and the like. So we'll see you at 10:45.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much. Don't miss that. That should be interesting. However, we're going to take a short little break. When we come back, Elvis Preslin will be back with us. Top of the hour at 10 o'clock for an updated look at the news. Don't go away.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
Everybody wants to look like Superman, and unfortunately nothing in a bottle, nothing in a capsule form will give you muscle. It's hard work, in fact it's smart work.
It is time sportsmen and women realize that supplements may be contaminated with banned substances and that this can affect their health in the long term.
The only way a supplement can be regarded as safe from banned substances is if the entire supplement batch is tested and cleared by an accredited anti-doping laboratory.
Join me on Health Talk every Saturday morning between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. as we unpack current health stories.
SABC News brings you the 13th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, delivered by one of the most influential and important thinkers of our time. He's the French economist everyone's talking about, author of the unlikely bestseller Capital in the 21st Century, the man they call the modern Karl Marx. Don't miss Professor Thomas Piketty on SABC 2, DSTV 404 and SAFM, Saturday 3rd October at 2.
This is Rights and Recourse.
This act says we are all the same, we are all equal before the law.
I have a fundamental problem with her saying that traditional leaders are recognized as the de facto owners of the land. That isn't in the Constitution, nor is it in any law.
Unpacking your legal rights and cost of action.
The Constitution starts from the point that we are one country and that we need to have a system that actually consolidates that, but also recognizes the different compositions of different communities.
With due respect to Aninka, I know she is happy that her queen in England, she's the owner of the whole land, she's not having any politics.
Chief Mukwena, we will get to some of the other issues.
You must withdraw that Aninka's Queen of England. Please, that's completely unacceptable.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays at 2 p.m. on the SABC News channel.
Welcome to Network, a technology news program that also discusses what's trending in social media in and around Africa. MTN has launched its new movie and television streaming service, Front Row. If it's trending, we will find it. That's Network with me, Springbok, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on the SABC News channel.
This week we are taking you around the continent, telling you stories about what makes Africa, Africa.
We now head to the Kenyan coast where we meet a man using needles to fight a growing drug culture.
A recent study
revealed that there are 850 drug addicts in Diani alone, with over 220 using injectable drugs such as heroin.
In my community, I've seen a lot of these people suffer.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Across the globe, locally, and on the entire continent. Every second, every minute, and every hour. There's always a breaking story. We commit to giving you the most important, significant, and interesting news. That's why it is not a surprise that more Africans are tuning to SABC News to find out what is happening. Because when news break, we've got you covered. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Makamelo Sekhuntse, one strong woman who said no to hunger. She never allowed circumstances to pull her down. At daybreak, she is up and running in the streets of Johannesburg to make her living. After 12 hours of hard work, she goes back home being able to put food on the table. Join me, Bulemo Lebatsi, on your show about those who take on and conquer life challenges every Saturday at 5:30.
Good. Point. Sit.
Get behind Rugby World Cup 2015 on SABC.
SABC News brings you the 13th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, delivered by one of the most influential and important thinkers of our time. He's the French economist everyone's talking about, author of the unlikely bestseller Capital in the 21st Century, the man they call the modern Karl Marx. Don't miss Professor Thomas Piketty on SABC2, DSTV 404 and SAFM, Saturday 3rd October at 2.
This is Rights and Recourse.
This act says we are all the same, we are all equal before the law.
I have a fundamental problem with her saying that traditional leaders are recognized as the de facto owners of the land. That isn't in the Constitution, nor is it in any law.
Unpacking your legal rights and cost of action.
The Constitution starts from the point that we are one country and that we need to have a system that actually consolidates that, but also recognizes the different compositions of different communities.
With due respect to Aninka, I know she is happy that her queen in England, she's the owner of the whole land, she's not having any politics.
Chief Mokoena, we will get to some of the other issues.
You must withdraw that Aninka's Queen of England. Please, that's completely unacceptable.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays at 2 p.m. on the SABC News channel.
Media Monitor, the title says it all. Can we really afford more job losses at such a critical time in our economy?
Join our panel of experts as they unpack and monitor all the leading and breaking news stories making waves in the print and social media platforms.
It seems we don't have a famous son-in-law any longer. Levi, what do you say to this? An A-lister.
I'll leave this one to Levi. He's the romantic.
Watch Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali, Sundays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News channel.
South Africa is the third leading country globally in TB infections.
We have 9 million new cases occurring globally, and 30% of those cases are occurring in the African region.
And there are two broad kinds of drug-resistant TB, so to speak. The one is MDR TB, and the other is XDR TB.
To ensure that everyone who's diagnosed with TB
is tested for HIV.
There's grossly inadequate funding for TB. Vaccine, drug and diagnostic research. We need a lot more.
Join me on Health Talk every Saturday morning between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. as we unpack current health stories.
SABC News brings you the 13th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, delivered by one of the most influential and important thinkers of our time. He's the French economist everyone's talking about, author of the unlikely bestseller Capital in the 21st Century, the man they call the modern Karl Marx. Don't miss Professor Thomas Piketty on SABC 2, DSTV 404 and SAFM, Saturday 3rd October at 2.
Shade after 1000 hours right here on Newsroom. It is Newsroom. It is a new show. It's a new beginning. My name is Elvis Preston. I'll be with you until 1 o'clock with myself, Elvis Preston, and of course our sports anchor, Kendall Makamate. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Elvis. Very excited about the new look Newsroom and looking good, especially when we'll be talking about what happened in the UEFA Champions League from last night. How Wayne Rooney missed his sitter, but they still managed to run out winners in that match. And I'll be chatting to Sean Wilson about the Proteas. They're out in India on a marathon tour. Stay tuned, around about 10:28 or so.
That's all coming up with Kendall Makamate. Remember that Eben Janssen will also be back later with a number of interviews. And, of course, we'll keep you updated what's happening on the social pages. That's all coming up right here on Newsroom. Right now, let's take a look at all your headlines. Tshwane bus services, commuters in Pretoria have been left stranded as bus operators who are members of the South African Municipal Workers Union down tools. The protest is due to the city of Tshwane's decision that they must carry cash and sell tickets in their buses. The Roads Must Fall movement disrupts a lecture of the French economist Thomas Piketty at the University of Cape Town. And veteran scrum half Rita Prayer named as the new Bok captain. Now those are all your headlines here on Newsroom. Our top story this hour. Eskom says a looming strike in the coal sector will not have an immediate effect on their ability to supply power. The utility says most of its power stations have a month's stockpile of coal. The National Union of Mine Workers earlier said it would give coal companies a 48-hour strike notice after the wage talks collapsed. Eskom spokesperson Kulapa Siwe says they have enough stock to last them for 30 days should there be a strike. However, he says the energy supplier wouldn't want a situation where there's a stoppage in the supply of coal. Meanwhile, the National Union of Mine Workers chief negotiator Peter Bailey has confirmed that NUM will give coal companies a 48-hour strike notice following the collapse of the wage talks. The union has been demanding 50% wage hikes but scaled back to 13%. The Chamber of Mines says it raised its offer to 8.5% for the lowest paid workers. Bailey says that 30,000 workers may embark on a strike. He spoke to SABC News last night.
I must first outline the process for you. In any dispute that arises, when a certificate of unresolved is issued, what then happens is that the other party who receives the certificate is compelled by the Labour Relations Act to give a 48-hour notification. That 48-hour notification, only when it lapses does the other party go on strike. So you can't commence on a strike before that. So I don't know where the conflicting views come from, that the certificate, the notice is not going to be issued. The notice is certainly going to be issued. What is the issue here for us? Maybe the issue of the timing. because it's Wednesday today. The earliest we can issue the notification is tomorrow. And after that, it will be running into the weekend. So we'll decide whether we issue it tomorrow or we issue it on Monday morning.
Schools in Zibidiela near Leboahomwa in Limpopo will finally reopen next week after an 8-week disruption. Residents shut down the school to demand a tarred road. Limpopo Premier Stan Matabata has now promised to tar the road starting from April next year. The schools are expected to reopen on Monday. Meanwhile, the pupils at Kopela village in the northwest are concerned ahead of exams following the burning down of 3 schools on Tuesday night. Residents from the village outside Delareyville torched the schools and a local clinic during service delivery protests. Schooling has been totally disrupted. The Northwest Education Department has condemned the incident, saying it will make alternative arrangements for the exams. 9 people were arrested and will appear in court soon. The minister in the presidency, Jeff Radebe, says he is not upset by the hostile reception that he got when accepting a memorandum from anti-corruption groups at the union buildings in Pretoria yesterday. Members of the United Against Corruption coalition booed him when he received the document. A second march was held in Cape Town.
A united stand against corruption. The message: boost efforts to combat corruption. The demands of the marchers include annual lifestyle audits of senior government officials, protection of whistleblowers and Chapter 9 institutions.
We're doing so not because we are angry against anybody, not because we're gaining any form of publicity, not because we have nothing else to do, not because we are stressed. We're doing so because we love our country, South Africa.
Minister Radebe accepted the memorandum on behalf of government. However, he was greeted with resounding boos.
Unite Against Corruption Coalition.
There's a law now that has been passed by Parliament and assented to by the President of it barring civil servants from doing business with government. So that's a reflection of our commitment in fighting the scourge of corruption.
Another anti-corruption march led by NUMSA and workers is on the cards for next month. Sepho Stirman, SABC News, Pretoria.
The Rhodes Must Fall movement at the University of Cape Town disrupted a lecture by the French economist Thomas Piketty yesterday. Now, due to Piketty missing his plane on Tuesday night, the lecture was scheduled to take place over Skype. But right before it started, members of the Rhodes Must Fall movement came into the lecture room and disrupted proceedings. Professor Piketty is scheduled to deliver a series of lectures before the 13th annual Nelson Mandela lecture on Saturday. Piketty missed his plane because he reportedly did not have the required amount of free pages in his passport. He's now expected to arrive in South Africa this morning. Meanwhile, the Wits University Vice-Chancellor, Professor Adam Habib, says that government has no will to transform historically black universities. Now, he was speaking at the 8th Imam Abdullah Harun Memorial Lecture in Cape Town last night.
Imam Abdullah Harun, a Muslim cleric, a leader, and so much more. Brutally murdered, he died in detention. He is remembered for the sacrifices he made in ensuring that all live in harmony.
Would he not have asked why universities receive only 22 billion rand in subsidy when the government's own task team says that at the global average they should be funded at 37 billion rand? Would he not have asked why is it that so many of our institutions remain racial enclaves?
Privileged universities were also used as examples where black students still feel culturally ostracized, causing student upsurge.
The children of rich parents land up going to Wits, UCT, Stellenbosch. The ones who land up at Walter Sisulu, the University of Zululand, Fort Hare, tend to be the children of the poorest within our communities. And until now, Government has lacked the will or the imagination, despite all of its political rhetoric, to develop these historically black universities.
The Imam Abdullah Haroon Trust says it's doing all it can to change the lives of the underprivileged, but need more donors to come forward and assist. Nomautu Solwandle, SABC News, Cape Town.
Now let's get back to the previous story we had on the Roads Must Fall movement at the University of Cape Town, who disrupted a lecture by the French economist Thomas Piketty yesterday. We're now joined on the line by the leader of the Roads Must Fall campaign, Chumani Mkwele. A very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning, good morning.
Firstly,
Thank you for having us.
why did you and your team decide to interrupt the lecture last night?
Well, I mean, we don't see it as a disruption of a lecture. I mean, with due respect with the economist, Mr. Professor Thomas Piketty. Well, the first thing first, it's not just, we don't want to take undue credit as Roads Must Fall. It's not just us who are part and parcel of our political expression yesterday. It was a UCT Nehau Joint Shop Steward Council, the Workers' Solidarity Committee, the Left Student Forum, SRC, Disrupt Whiteness, South African Student Congress, and of course the Palestinian Solidarity Forum and Muslim Youth Movement. All these movements are part and parcel of UCT activism currently. As you would know, that at UCT there's what you call outsourcing. And outsourcing is part and parcel of the so-called poor working class workers at UCT. That includes your securities, your cleaners, and of course the general gardeners who keep UCT green. And for us, since the beginning of this year, we've been expressing our solidarity with the workers. Now the workers have decided to take a stand as a united voice, led by Nehau as a union, that the UCT must, in fact, insource the workers. And the lecture that came, you know, the theme that was categorized by UCT says poverty and inequality. And then we felt as a collective student movement in campus that it's very hypocritical for the university to take an opportunity and be opportunistic to invite Professor Thomas to come and give us a lecture on poverty and inequality, yet they themselves are exploiting the workers at the university. As we speak now, the workers have declared a dispute with the university. There will be a huge march that is coming up, rallied by workers. As we speak now, Roads Must Fall Together, Rethink Africa. We are organizing a talk around the inequality in terms of the wage and the standard of wage living. Mm-hmm. And this for us is not just beginning on the attacking or interrupting the lecture, as you put it. It's not about that. It's about a consistent solidarity with the workers. And we felt that it would be uncalled for us to participate in a lecture that talks about inequality, and yet the University of Cape Town keep on exploiting the workers on the ground, and workers were excluded totally from the lecture itself. And of course, even the remarks that were made by the Vice-Chancellor, Mr. Trevor Manuel, Professor Jabulo Ndebele, none of them made reference to the poor workers who happen to be black. Of course, these are workers, our parents, our brothers, who are working as securities, as gardeners, and as cleaners at university. Then we took that responsibility not just to express ourselves in the particular lecture, but to contradict the university's stance in terms of the workers.
Now, Chumani, so were you excluded from this particular discussion or the lecture?
Systematically so. Systematically so. I mean, you can look at the invitation of the university. None in that invitation does not say anything that we invite the workers, so that the workers are a center of debate. Workers have got leaders at the university. We've said this thing a long time ago. They've got leaders. Those leaders represent the views of the workers. Now you bring a very clear professor in terms of inequality. Professor Thomas is very clear that, in fact, the systematic exploitation of workers through the economic power structure of the world, and of course UCT is part of that. And now using this pro-poor, pro-black professor to come and tell us, of course, tell the bourgeois of UCT how things are working and so on and so forth. And then for us, we feel that it was a total exclusion of the workers and a total exclusion of student movement. None of the movement in the university currently were invited as contributors. Instead, the university went to collect its former vice-chancellor, Professor Dalindyebo, to come and speak. Speak on what? Because he never changed anything about UCT. Now, when you ask Professor Dalindyebo, what have you done about outsourcing of workers at UCT, which were crying in your tenure at university, and then he will tell you that he has done nothing. Now, bring Mr. Trevor Manuel to come and have a remark about the lecture. And then for me, it's actually undermining the workers. Why don't you bring student leaders such as Rose Masfall? Why don't you bring leaders of Nehau who represent the views of the workers? Why do you bring people from outside who have nothing to do with the internal dynamics of the university? We felt that the university is undermining us. And of course, as you know, since March this year, Rose Masfall never wrote a letter requesting a coffee and a tea with the vice-chancellor, because we understand that that is not our language. That language has long passed, because the university cannot hear us in anything, not unless we take an action, of course, the old resistant action, which is a tradition of black people who are poor in this country, that we must be able to visibilize ourselves, because in the university's faces, we are invisible, and workers become worse, because now our parents and our brothers at the university are crying, please have solidarity with us. And we are saying now, as students, we will provide solidarity for workers, because our workers are exploited, the security are exploited, and the cleaners are exploited. Now, what must we do? Should we clap hands and say, well, we don't care about you? And yet, these are the people who clean our residence. These are the people who clean the vice-chancellor's office and even bring him coffee. Now, for us, I think these workers, they must be insourced. That's the only demand workers are making. That's the only demand we are making. Insource these workers. UCT is so rich. It pays the vice-chancellor 1 million a year. Now, tell me, a vice-chancellor who earns 1 million a year, and then you coming here to talk about poverty and inequality, and yet workers, I mean, a lowest paid worker.
Thank you, Chumani. That's where we got to leave it. That was the leader of the Rhodes Must Fall campaign, Chumani Maxwele, live from Cape Town. Breaking news now. Abatembu King Bulekaya Dalindyebo has been sentenced to 12 years in prison in the Bloemfontein Court Appeal. Now, while the culpable homicide sentence of 10 years was set aside, he was sentenced to 5 years on 3 counts of arson. On 7 counts of kidnapping, which were taken as one by the court, he was sentenced to 1 year. On 3 counts of assault, 5 years imprisonment for each count. On 2 counts of defeating the ends of justice, he was sentenced to 3 years. All these sentences will run concurrently. Dalindyebo has been out on bail since he was sentenced to 15 years in prison in 2009. The crimes for which he was convicted were committed between June 1995 and January 1996. He allegedly kidnapped Nonqingile Sonteya and her 6 children, who were later released unharmed. Dalindyebo then burnt 5 rondavels belonging to 2 of his subjects. Another man, Saziwo Wofa, died of his injuries after being assaulted by Dalindyebo and his men. That is your breaking news.
This is Rights and Recourse.
This act says we are all the same, we are all equal before the law.
I have a fundamental problem with her saying that traditional leaders are recognized as the de facto owners of the land. That isn't in the Constitution, nor is it in any law.
Unpacking your legal rights and cost of action.
The Constitution starts from the point that we're one country, and that we need to have a system that actually consolidates that, but also recognizes the different compositions of different communities.
With due respect to Aninka, I know she is happy that her queen in England, she's the owner of the whole land, she's not having any politics.
Chief Mokoena, we will get to some of the other issues.
You must withdraw that Aninka's Queen of England. Please, that's completely unacceptable.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays at 2 p.m. on the SABC News channel.
SABC News brings you the 13th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, delivered by one of the most influential and important thinkers of our time. He's the French economist everyone's talking about, author of the unlikely bestseller Capital in the 21st Century, the man they call the modern Karl Marx. Don't miss Professor Thomas Piketty on SABC 2, DSTV 404 and SAFM, Saturday 3rd October at 2.
Right now, welcome back. I'm Kendall Makamati doing your sports on Newsroom. The Proteas are about to kick off a marathon tour to India lasting over 2 months. Now, playing all formats, they start with a T20 tomorrow and will play their last test towards the end of the year. And with me is Sean Wilson, somebody who's no stranger to you, who's watched AM News before, but as you know, we're now Newsroom Reloaded. And Sean, welcome back, but this time, welcome to Newsroom.
Great to be here. Very exciting.
Yeah, I quite like this look. I mean, I've seen it so many times, and now I'm in it, and so are you.
Yeah, very exciting.
That's fantastic. Sean, the reason we're here is we're talking about the Proteas and this massive tour they're about to take to India. Do you remember when last the Proteas toured India?
For this long time, I do. Well, last time there was a test series involved was in 2010, which of course was a 2-test series, which was tied 1-1, and it was a cracker. It was filled with lots of Hashim Amla centuries, and it was last time they played a test in India against Sachin Tendulkar as well. So it's been far too long coming, this tour of India. We've waited for a long time. A 4-test series is unprecedented for the Proteas as well. That makes it very exciting. A 2-month tour is almost old-fashioned these days to see the guys tour away for this long. But of course, there's a lot of one-day cricket that builds up towards it. So I think it's kind of sprung on a lot of sports fans, this tour. I think they've been taken up by the Rugby World Cup coming up. Football's been exciting domestically and abroad as well. Interesting starts this season. So feast of cricket.
No, fantastic. I want to ask you a little bit about the rugby, but a little later on towards the end of our little chat. Do you, looking at what happened with our South African A side, do you reckon that result, being beaten by 8 wickets, that's a thrashing of note? Do you think that's got any bearing on the main squad's performance that we can expect?
History says the warm-up games generally have very little bearing in most formats that they go with. I mean, it's the players' first foray into the conditions that they're touring with. Not much should be too read into it. One thing you could possibly read into it is the batting lineup that the Proteas chose. They chose A.B. de Villiers opening the batting, which is something that they did in Bangladesh. I think a lot of analysts aren't sure if he should be opening the batting, but it's probably better off having A.B. de Villiers batting too high up the order rather than too low, because the Proteas were definitely falling into the trap of having A.B. de Villiers bat too low in the T20 formats. And secondly, I was a little concerned at all the bowling figures. No one seemed to put across bowling figures that were economical or wicket-taking. I mean, it was an 8-wicket loss against a decent India A side. Of course, India are very, very, very good at T20 cricket as well. So a lot of it's just feeling out the conditions. We'll have to see.
Well, I mean, looking at the squad that's been chosen, do you think we've got a team that's strong enough to actually take them on in India? I know that Imran Tahir is expected to pull out the stops. He's back in the side. Pangiso is out. Do you think he's the right man to be leading that spin attack?
Yeah, I think there's a decent T20 team in there. It's quite an inexperienced bowling attack for the T20 series. I mean, they haven't gone with Dale Steyn or Morne Morkel. I think one of the problems the Proteas have is they don't play too much T20 cricket as a team in itself, so they don't really build the team dynamics. I mean, outside of World Cup years, the Proteas play 10 or less T20 games as a national unit, so it's quite hard to mould a bowling attack. The bowling attack we've used for this T20 is pretty inexperienced. Kyle Abbott is probably the most experienced. This is a big tour for Kagiso Rabada, a very exciting pace. I think that'll be key, how he goes with all our pace. And you're right, looking at that squad, it's probably reliant on Imran Tahir, arguably the world's best spinner in the shorter formats of the game. And there's a lot of exciting spin options. Eddie Lee has come into the squad ahead of Aaron Pangiso on the T20, and they swap around when it comes to the one-day internationals. Yeah. So I think all-out leg spin is going to be quite an interesting tactic for T20 because, of course, we need this is invaluable homework for the World Cup that will be with the World T20, which will be held at the end of our summer next year.
All right. Now, looking at the rest of the squad, let's go through the batting lineup. You mentioned that we had a quick look at the South African batting lineup and see how what they're looking like. Do you reckon are there any particular weaknesses we need to be looking out for in case we get caught short?
Yeah, I think the Proteas aren't quite sure how to structure their T20 innings specifically. Let's deal with the T20. The two squads, the T20 squad and the ODI squad, are actually quite identical in terms of if you look at 8 batsmen, including the wicketkeeper, it's exactly the same in both ones. So it's quite simple. But in T20, you might think that you want to get a little bit cuter. Because they don't play much together, I think they should possibly look towards how the South Africans perform in the IPL and how IPL captains and coaches choose to use certain players because there's this discrepancy between the two. We use Faf du Plessis as a number 3 in all formats of the game, whereas at the Chennai Super Kings, they use him more as a floating role. People go all out up front for the Chennai Super Kings, and depending on what is needed, if early wickets have fallen, Faf du Plessis comes in and tries to hold out together, or if they've gone like a Boeing, Faf du Plessis just comes in to rotate the strike and give the feed to them. The Proteas don't use them like that. Maybe we think we should. Yeah. AB de Villiers bats at number 3 for his franchise. Albie Morkel, who's in the T20 squad, is batted high up the order for the Delhi Daredevils. And the way they use their bowlers, sometimes they use our bowlers up front for the ones that we don't trust bowling at the death. You know, I've talked often about how we doubt how the Proteas use death bowling. Well, the IPL franchises mainly use their South African seamers up front, done and dusted. So I think there's little tweaks around that the Proteas could work with.
All right, no, very good. So the first T20I is tomorrow afternoon. And can you hazard a prediction there? Who's going to stand out in terms of the South African side? A quick one?
Yeah, it's unusual venue in Dharamsala at the foot of the Himalayas, so it's going to be unfamiliar for a few things with the characters. I think have a look at Eddie Lee. I'm pretty sure he'll play, and let's see how he does.
Yeah, because he is the unknown quantity for the Indians, isn't he?
Absolutely.
All right, now, Sean, thank you very much for having joined us. But now, quick one. Now, there's something that I want to share with you as well as with our viewers. I mean, a lot of people know already that Fourie du Preez will become the Springboks' 56th Test captain when he leads South Africa out in a do-or-die encounter. Now, this against Scotland at James Park in Newcastle this coming Saturday. Now, we had some people that had stuff to say on Twitter. Now, before you go, let's see what they had to say and share this with us. Idols, as say, Rema Vari, Fourie du Preez, new Bok captain, genius. He's obviously very happy about that. That came in just less than a little while ago. TIJ Nondra, though I'm a huge fan of Fourie du Preez, selecting him as captain shows a clear lack of post-de Villiers and Matfield planning. Well, what do you say about that? Both de Villiers and Matfield are well into their 30s. I mean, what do you reckon about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the one criticism that's always been with the Springbok squad is it too old? What is the line between too old and nice experience?
Yeah.
I think some people have been pointing at Fourie du Preez's appointment as a possible lack of planning. I mean, at the beginning of his tenure, he offered the post to Fourie du Preez, who was unavailable for it. So I think he's always been in the mix in a squad that has a lot of captains in it. I'm very excited about Fourie du Preez.
You and me too. You and me too. Rugger World says, new South African captain Fourie du Preez admitted he was delighted to get the chance to lead his country at the second time of asking, because yes, in 2012 he's had enough time to think about it as well. So it seems like there's quite a lot of positivity coming out of this, that he has taken on this role, that Heineken Meyer has chosen this particular man to be the new captain.
I think so. Look, I mean, Jean de Villiers' loss can't be underestimated in terms of the effect that it has on the squad and the sadness that they feel for them, the one or two pulled together. But I see it as this is if there is a nice time to take over as a captaincy after your captain is retired, I would say this one, because you inherit a squad with a whole lot of leaders in it.
Yes.
They've just come off a game where it feels like Springbok spirit has turned around, but they're still humbled by the Japanese result. So it's a nice balance between feeling good but not getting ahead of yourself going into the Scotland game.
Nicely put, nicely put. Last one, Kurt Mullen said, on paper, this Bok team looks menacing. Paper tigers or real tigers? Well done, Fourie du Preez. Great having my favorite player just been named captain. We want to thank you very much for having joined us on this one. It's been fantastic chatting to you and also getting your thoughts on some of the comments we're getting in the Twitter sphere.
Yeah, no, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Right, now, that was Sean Wilson, our resident cricket analyst. Now, the second night of UEFA Champions League matches this week brought out some respite for fans of English football, particularly those of the Manchester United bent. They ran out eventual 2-1 winners against Wolfsburg at Old Trafford. Now, this as Ronaldo bagged a brace for Real Madrid against Malmo on the continent. Now, here are highlights of the action from last night.
And they're in here. Well, what a start by Wolfsburg. Caligiuri is the goal scorer. Manchester United cut apart. Oh, he's got past Rodriguez. And it should have been the equaliser from Wayne Rooney. Mata, problems for Wolfsburg here. Shouts for handball. Caligiuri, penalty given. It's 1-1. A terrific position for Young to cross from. A flick by Mata. Smalling! Well, he stayed up, and he got his reward, and Juan Mata cleverly gave him the chance.
Needs support, and it comes from Bazali. Morata! Juve in front, and it's Alvaro Morata. Scored the winning goal on match day 1 at Manchester City. Scores the opening goal here at the Juve Stadium. Oh, it breaks here for Zaza. Now, has he got the pace to go all the way? Simone Zaza to wrap it up, yes! A huge roar around the Juventus Stadium. 3 points, signed, sealed and delivered.
Malmo have lost their defensive shape. It's Cristiano Ronaldo with all the time in the world to score. Malmo's game plan going out of the window. Lucas. And there's the touch from Ronaldo that draws him level with Raul, right at the top of Real Madrid's all-time goal-scoring charts. His and Real Madrid's second tonight, a record-equaling goal from Cristiano Ronaldo.
All right, we're going to have a quick look at a summary of the results from all of last night's action. As you can see, they're right there on your screen. Quite a whole lot of matches played last night. Top of the top is a 2-0 win for Real Madrid, and then also PSG doing their job out in Donetsk, and PSV going out 3-2 losers to Moscow. If you go down to the bottom of the fixture, the results list, you'll see that Atletico Madrid lost 2-1 to Benfica, Manchester United and Manchester City 2-1 against Mönchengladbach. Juventus 2-0. They win in Turin against Sevilla. That's where we leave it with the sports. We're going to take a very short break, and when we come back, of course, we've got more news.
SABC News brings you the 13th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, delivered by one of the most influential and important thinkers of our time. He's the French economist everyone's talking about, author of the unlikely bestseller Capital in the 21st Century, the man they call the modern Karl Marx. Don't miss Professor Thomas Piketty on SABC 2, DSTV 404 and SAFM, Saturday 3rd October at 2.
The internet has been found to be a tool used by militant groups when recruiting members. This has forced governments to create tighter internet laws. Technology has also been used to call for social change, as was the case with the abducted Nigerian girls.
The people on social media are some of the society's most influential. If they get an issue started, you're likely to have that issue become a national issue.
And on Network, we tell you about this serious side of technology, but we have fun too with gadgets, games and cars. That's Network every Sunday at 19:30, only on SABC News.
Welcome back. This is still Newsroom. Time for us now to shift our focus and have a look at what's been going on the African continent. Now, as we head into October, the Central African Republic, Burkina Faso and Tanzania are expected to head to the polls for democratic vote. But in each country, the presidents will not step down from leadership, but rather continue to hold on to power despite opposition from their own people within every country. Pope Francis this week addressed the United Nations Committee at the start of the UN Sustainable Development Summit that took place, denouncing greed and hunger for power that he believes fuels poverty and then contributes to the destruction of countries and their economies. This year, the International Criminal Court has been inundated with cases pertaining to the misuse of power by African leaders, as well as a variety of war crimes that were committed. Now, I'm joined in the studio this morning by our resident economic and political analyst, Israel Mkhize. A very good morning to you, Israel. Thanks for joining us.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
The question that's doing the rounds this week is, why are African leaders so intent on hanging on to power, often to the detriment of their countries, to the detriment of the economy, and also against the will of the people in those countries? What's your take on that?
Well, it's a very serious issue for concern, but we need to know that of the 44 sub-Saharan countries in Africa, only 33 have avowed to the notion of two terms constitutionalism. And you may know that about 18 countries in Africa have not vowed to that two-term constitutionalism. Number two, it's surprising that the level of discontent, disconnection between what we say as rhetoric, for instance, and what the people do. Like, take the case of Sudan with the al-Bashir case. He's been in power for a very long time, but you'll be surprised that he received a good 94% in the last polling elections.
Yeah.
And again, what you find is that there's a senior leadership, which was the first generation out of independence, where younger guys, like for instance, you take the Burundi president, Nkurunziza. Suppose it looks up to Robert Mugabe, or the president Dos Santos of Angola.
Yeah.
They have been in power, Mugabe from 1980, and Dos Santos has been 35 years. So we need to, I suppose, do a country by country and see what is this constitutional social contract between the government and structures of governance with the populace. You look at Congo-Brazzaville, the constitution there, somehow the current president, it says that at 70, the president cannot stand, let alone for 2 terms. The president currently is going to, obviously, for next year elections, he's going to be cut out. You go to Congo, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, with Kabila. You'll realize that he changed the constitution, I think in section 220, where he says that previously the constitution was saying that when there is a runoff or equal vote, the person who will take over the state as president must have at least a minimum of 50% votes. But being aware that he may not be so popular with the populace, the voting electorate, then they say, no, let the president or the running candidate who has a majority, even if it's 35% or 40%, does not necessarily have to be above 50%.
Let's look at Brazzaville, Congo-Brazzaville. Sassou Nguesso has now come out. You mentioned the 70-year-old Cap. He wants to change the constitution there to allow him to stand again next year. At what point do you look at outside intervention to stop and kind of draw a line? Here, the role of the AU really comes into focus.
Well, first we have to be careful that what types of constitutions do this president come from? Is it the party that is saying that we need him to continue to push the policies of the party? Then if that were the case, then the parties, political parties would then be very weak. With the external intervention, for instance, the AU in the NEPA document, for instance, and the Vision 2063, they raised the question of good governance and stability with the transitions into new regimes and the changes there. So what you find is that when we're looking for international or outside intervention, You find that the president himself is a proxy president, maybe for a former colonist government that has vested interest, particularly in the private sector of that company. Then they will do by all means, that the president must stay in power, so that those who are major shareholders from outside, perhaps in Europe particularly, will continue to have access to those particular business and natural resources that they're extracting from those particular countries.
On the continent there, we have this unwritten rule of 2 terms. Is this a good fit? If the will of the people is different, should we review this? Should there be a review at all?
I think the problem we've done is to treat Africa as a homogeneous region, as if it's got the same problems, the same challenges. I think it should depend country per country. For instance, you have in our own context where the first democratic president didn't even serve 2 terms. He just served 1 term and he stepped down, which is Nelson Mandela. In other countries, you'll find that in the whole world, there are over 15 presidents who have served over 20 years. And 10 of those come from Africa. So each country must actually look at its own. For instance, ECOWAS, again, had a meeting last year where they said, let's review this question of 2 terms. And the resolution which came out was that, no, let us not have a blanketing resolution which says there should be 2 terms. Hence, you see what's going on in Burkina Faso with Compaoré, who's been in power since 1987 until last year when he was ousted from power. And you have a case, you've got Benin, you've got, as I mentioned, with the case in Sudan. So it should be that, particularly because African countries are saying they're looking towards the East, which is your Asian tiger nations who term themselves as developmental states. For them to become developmental states, they had to make sure that the state instruments, institutions, democratization of the state was on point. So African states cannot continue to call themselves democratic states, developmental democratic states, looking from the East, when they're ignoring the very important factor of the capacity of the state, as we are seeing in the East.
The International Criminal Court now comes into focus. We've seen the furore here in Africa with what has been seen the persecution of African leaders by the International Criminal Court. How does this play into this, and how do we come to terms with it, both regionally in a sort of SADC, ECOWAS, those sort of scenario, and then the wider AU?
Well, the ICC is the most interesting one for Africa, because at the founding of the ICC, I think it's in 2002, you would realize that most African signatories of the Roman Statute may have not conceived how the ICC would roll out. Maybe they thought for them it's a protection against former Western imperialists. And Western imperialists would have thought that it's their way of chasing non-democratic African so-called dictators. But it's funny that about 63% of the membership of the ICC are African countries, and over 33 of them are the signatories on the ICC. So by continental demographic, you then see that the majority in the pie of the membership of the ICC comes from Africa. If it's 33 countries, that means it's over 66% of the African states, because we've got about 54 states. So if you've got if then the demographic is dispersed in that way, it's highly likely that more charges would fall towards Africa. But we are saying we haven't seen any country being brought to book from Europe and other signatories that have committed very, very serious crimes against humanity. And if you check Article 2 of the Roman Statute, you realize that it implies, by inference, its membership to the Security Council, that if there is failure of compliance, some cases will be referred to the Security Council. But the problem is there's not one African country which is a member of the Security Council.
We've got individuals hanging on to power. I want to bring you back to one of the countries that's been in the headlines, in the news, the Central African Republic. We have a different scenario where it's ethnic groups coming in and holding on to power. How do we address those kinds of issues?
Well, it's a very serious, but it doesn't start with CAR only. You've got that problem with Rwanda and Burundi. I think the documents, as we mentioned, that have been put forward by the African Union to say let us try, even though this term may be scary, to modernize our systems of governance from authoritarian rules and from ethnic rule to more democratic. Let me make a case to answer your question. If you look in Burundi, not all the people who are of Nkurunziza's race agrees with him.
Yeah.
Same thing in the CAR, as we saw the blocking of the president towards, as he rushed from the UN. Not everyone, it's like, for instance, in our context, not everyone agrees with a particular political player because they come from his ethnicity. So it's an important transition to try and constitutionalize the states in Africa and try to democratize them so that the processes use rational, secular kind of understanding of governance rather than where was I born, what is my ethnicity.
Very interesting indeed. Israel Mkhize, thank you for joining us this morning. It's a discussion we'll continue in the weeks and months ahead of us. Israel is a specialist in African economic and political matters. Thank you once again for joining us. Of course, what are your views on African leaders hanging on to power for more than 2 terms? What do you think? Should it be allowed? Should there be interventions? At SABC Newsroom is where we would really like you to interact with us on this matter and share your views with us. Now, we move on to some of the other issues facing us, and it seems on the African continent we are increasingly at odds with our environment. Climate change is affecting us, and one of the major issues that faces Southern Africa are drought, issues of drought and food production. Now, millions of people face starvation due to the effects of ongoing drought and the region's food production. 4 million people in Zimbabwe alone are directly at risk. But other SADC countries, including South Africa, have seen the production of staples such as maize plummet in recent times. The country's been forced to import maize for the first time, for the first time in a few years. And a drought, the worst one, they say, in more than 20 years, is upon us. And it seems it's only getting worse. Now, Tsietse, Paul Munari is with us to talk about the environment and to tell us about the issues that Southern Africa is being faced with. Tsietse, first, paint the picture. Drought, Southern Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
The outlook isn't great, is it?
Yeah, in fact, we've been talking about this the whole year about the rains not coming in at the right time, maybe coming in a bit later and not in the right quantities. And I mentioned earlier in the year that we've actually been going through one of those dry spells that we sort of been noticing since about 1966, that this is actually one of the driest times that we are about to go through. And with that, coming up with the lack of water that you're already facing in South Africa, the KwaZulu-Natal region as well is quite drier than usual, which is one of the places that get a lot more rainfall than most parts of South Africa. If you basically were to compare the east versus the west, the east is where it's usually wetter and we get over 1,000 millimeters of rainfall. But now it's becoming less and less, and there's actually constraints. And the picture actually looks pretty gloom. Most of our wells are dry. The water table has sunk a little bit more as well. And, of course, that's going to affect food production.
It's definitely South Africa's maize production has been cut down by a third. But tell us the direct effect. What are the weather conditions? We hear about ENSO, the El Nino effect. It has on the country, it has on the region. Now, with regards to El Nino, tell us the effect that it's having on us in the short term, but what's the outlook, medium and long term?
Yeah, before we jump into the El Nino, let's look at the direct effect, as you mentioned. Of course, food production is one big thing. It's obviously going to affect our economy, and also, the poor are usually staying poor and becoming quite a dire situation. And if you can quickly jump into our weather system and maybe just throw some of the pictures on the video wall behind us, you will see that it has been dropping since, the last couple of years. If you can see there, this is a commercial maize production for South Africa, as well as including Zimbabwe over the last couple of years. And it's also been hit by the severe droughts that we're going through.
Yeah.
This one specifically is for Zimbabwe. And if you look at the couple of instances where it has dropped down below about 500,000, which is, quite hectic. If you imagine people actually expecting something like 3,000 tons that the subsistence farming that they're doing themselves and commercial farming included. Now, when this hits, a lot of people now cannot make money for themselves.
Yeah.
Now they have to depend on government, and they also have to depend on, a lot of taxes, and the consequences that come with that. And this just indicates how the drought has been affecting us over the last couple of years. If you look at from 1981 up until just around 2007, so I haven't even included what happened between 2010 and 2015, which is just a line that's going down and down and down some more. And that's basically related to the weather, the severe weather that we're going through. And with the less rainfall that's coming through, that's exactly what's happening. And if you look at 1992, which is what you also mentioned in your opening just now, 1992 is one of the most driest areas, or driest period that we experienced, 92 and 97. And now we're heading to another one in 2015.
How do we overcome this? Are we in a scenario where we have to look at GM maize that's maybe more drought resistant?
Yeah, well, if you look at genetically modified foods, they also have got their own, withdrawals or backdrops that we are not really, favoring. But that's something we really need, especially in dry areas. We need to get crops that can survive drought or dry conditions a lot more. So that, I personally would encourage it, especially in things such as corn and sunflower seeds and so on, because then they'll be more resistant to severe weather that we're going through, hot weather, and of course the droughts. But most importantly, even, is we need to start living a more sustainable life. We need to conserve water, and we need to save as much as we can. We basically need to work towards fixing the leaks that you normally don't notice in your house, because the less water we use here now, the more can be focused into agricultural sectors and, of course, farming, so that we can get back on track with our production, because we are one of the best maize producers in the world. So we can actually, get back onto being one of the top ones.
4 million people facing starvation. Short-term solutions in Zimbabwe. Is it just simple as importing?
I wish I could say it's as simple as that, but importing of stuff usually leads to other constraints. I mean, if we now focus on the budget going to importation of, corn and so forth, then we can never really bounce back from it. It's always going to be short term. It's always going to be, what then when we run out? Maybe we can look at other diets, which could also be a little bit more expensive and also really not affordable for people. But those are some of the issues that we can look at. I want us to...
Banting, eat more meat. Eat more meat, eat less corn. Make the nation skinny.
I want us to jump to El Nino, which is one of the impacts. And if you can go back to our weather slides, and hopefully I can move backwards and just show you. Now, the El Nino, this is one of the main reasons why we're having these dry conditions. So what happens with an El Nino is it's translated into little boy or Christ child, because it comes around December period, around now, October until December. So what happens is, just over the eastern Pacific Ocean there, you get these jet streams with cooler air. So when it's blowing normally, that's what would happen on a normal day. But in a couple of years like this, I'm just going to move. I hope this does not look odd, guys. Here, when it gets quite warmer than usual, and then it moves all the way towards the eastern parts and going towards the western side of South America, and that's when it leads to really hot conditions, and the sea surface water becomes very hot. And when that happens, leads to drought in the United States, hot weather here in South Africa, and possibilities of tropical storms as well.
Well, unfortunately, Chethu, we've run out of time. It's something that I'd like to revisit with you a little bit more, because it affects so many people, especially here in Southern Africa. But that's where we have to wrap. A first look with Paul at how the world is affected by the environment. We're also going to look at green issues, climate change, and so forth going forward. Every Thursday, Tsietsi will be joining us to talk about this. Thank you once again for joining us. Time for us to take a short break. When we come back, top of the hour, Elvis will give us another complete news update.
The internet has been found to be a tool used by militant groups when recruiting members. This has forced governments to create tighter internet laws. Technology has also been used to call for social change, as was the case with the abducted Nigerian girls.
The people on social media are some of the society's most influential. If they get an issue started, you're likely to have that issue become a national issue.
And on Network, we tell you about this serious side of technology, but we have fun too with gadgets, games and cars. That's Network every Sunday at 19:30, only on SABC News.
Health Talk, your show on health practice.
The people being empowered with knowledge so that they can change their behavior and reduce their risk of being sick.
How serious is stress at work?
If we don't address workplace stress, that negative stress, then it can lead to burnout and it can lead to depression.
How does absentees affect companies?
The one that's really problematic for employers is the one that is unscheduled.
How can companies organize their wellness program?
Health promotion mustn't just be a one-size-fits-all type of approach. It must be customized based on understanding of the unique needs of that particular organization.
For health tips that will help you to adopt healthy living with Dr. Sillo Mutawung on Health Talk every Saturday.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
This is Newsroom, Jumbo Africa, and a very warm welcome to the no, it's not the final hour yet. We still got 2 hours to go. We're broadcasting live from our Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg, South Africa, to the rest of the African continent. I'm Elvis Preslin. Eben Janssen will join you a little bit later to bring you some of the topical discussion points on the day, and Anine Domel will update you on Twitter and all the social media pages. And joining me right now is our sports anchor, Kendall Makamate. A very good morning once again.
Oh, good morning, Elvis. It's been a cracker of a morning, especially when we hear that we've got a brand new captain in Furido Priya. He's a veteran scrum half. We all know what he does now. He's going to be also captaining the side at the Rugby World Cup. So more about all of that a little later in the Sports Bulletin.
That's all coming up, but right now let's take a look at all your headlines. Abatembu King Bulekaya Dalindyebo has lost his appeal in the Bloemfontein Court of Appeals following his 2009 conviction on charges of culpable homicide and kidnapping. Tshwane Bus Services commuters in Pretoria have been left stranded as bus operators who are members of the South African Municipal Workers Union down tools. The protest is due to the City of Tshwane's decision that they must carry cash and sell tickets on their buses. And veteran scrum half Furido Priya named as the new Bok captain. Now those are all your headlines. Top story this hour. Abatembu King Bulekaya Dalindyebo has been sentenced to 12 years in prison in the Bloemfontein Court appeal. Now while the culpable homicide sentence of 10 years was set aside, he was sentenced to 5 years on 3 counts of arson. On 7 counts of kidnapping, which were taken as one by the court, he was sentenced to 1 year. On 3 counts of assault, 5 years imprisonment for each count. On 2 counts of defeating the ends of justice, he was sentenced to 3 years. All of these sentences will run concurrently. Dalindyebo has been out on bail since he was sentenced to 15 years in prison in 2009. The crimes for which he was convicted were committed between June 1995 and January 1996. He allegedly kidnapped Nongcingile Sonteya and her 6 children, who were later released unharmed. Dalindyebo then burnt 5 rondavels belonging to 2 of his subjects. Another man, Saziwa Wofa, died of his injuries after being assaulted by Dalindyebo and his men. Now on the line, we are joined by the Abatembu King spokesperson, Mfundo Buvulengwe. Mfundo, a very good afternoon to you, or good morning to you rather. Your reaction to the ruling as we speak?
Morning and morning to the viewers.
What's your reaction to the ruling?
I cannot comment right now because I've just heard about the news from the media. But if it is true, I am very disappointed with the democratic government, which they did the same thing they did to his father. Very disappointed. And today is the 1st of October, which is a very important day to us as Abathembu. It was the reburial of his father, late King Sabata Dalindyebo. On that day, which changed the political climate in South Africa. But it is the saddest day today if our king is convicted. But it's very difficult to comment on that because I've only heard it from the media. When I spoke to the king and I met the king, and then we'll discuss it and I'll be able to comment further.
Why are you disappointed? Don't you think that he is guilty of the crimes that was committed?
I'm disappointed because I believe this is politically more than what it was, because it happened in 1997, more than 10 years back, and it was disappeared. And after he joined DA, it came up again. So that's why I believe it's more political than it is.
You say it's political. From which perspective do you think it's political?
Because the time he was not in, he was supporting the ruling party. The case was disappeared. After he joined DA, and then the case came up.
And so therefore you think...
That's why I believe it's political motivated.
So what is your next move now?
Until I meet the king, and then until the royal family sits, until... I don't know whether there are options for appeal, but if there are options for appeal, definitely we are going to appeal to the Constitutional Court.
Thank you so much.
Until we meet, yes.
Thank you so much for your time. That was the King's spokesperson, Mfundo Buvulengo, telling us his take on the story and, of course, the sentence by the King. Now, Eskom says a looming strike in the coal sector will not have an immediate impact on their ability to supply power. The utility says most of its power stations have a month's stockpile. The National Union of Mine Workers earlier said it would give coal companies a 48-hour strike notice after the wage talks collapsed. Eskom spokesperson Kulupasiwe says they have enough stock to last them 30 days should there be a strike. However, he says the energy supplier wouldn't want a situation where there's a stoppage in the supply of coal. Meanwhile, the National Union of Mine Workers chief negotiator Peter Bailey has confirmed that NUM will give coal companies that 48-hour strike notice following the collapse of the wage talks. The union had been demanding 50% wage hikes, but scaled back to 13%. The Chamber of Mines, on the other hand, says it raised its offer to 8.5% for the lowest paid workers. Bailey says 30,000 workers may embark on a strike. He spoke to SABC News last night.
I must first outline the process for you. In any dispute that arises, when a certificate of unresolved is issued, what then happens is that the other party who receives the certificate is compelled by the Labour Relations Act to give a 48-hour notification. That 48-hour notification, only when it lapses does the other party go on strike. So you can't commence on a strike before that. So I don't know where the conflicting views come from, that the certificate, the notice is not going to be issued. The notice is certainly going to be issued. What is the issue here for us? Maybe the issue of the timing, because it's Wednesday today. The earliest we can issue the notification is tomorrow. And after that, it will be running into the weekend. So we'll decide whether we issue it tomorrow or we issue it on Monday morning.
Schools in Zebediela near Loboahomu in Limpopo will finally reopen next week after an 8-week disruption. Residents shut down the school and demanded a tar road. Limpopo Premier Stan Matabata has now promised to tar the road starting from April next year. And the schools are expected to reopen on Monday. Meanwhile, the pupils at Kopela village in the northwest are concerned ahead of the exams following the burning down of 3 schools on Tuesday night. Residents from the village outside Dalindyebo torched the schools and a local clinic during service delivery protest. Schooling has been totally disrupted. The Northwest Education Department has condemned the incident, saying it will make alternative arrangements for the exams. 9 people were arrested and will appear in court soon. The minister in the presidency, Jeff Radebe, says he is not upset by the hostile reception that he received when accepting a memorandum from anti-corruption groups at the union buildings in Pretoria yesterday. Members of the United Against Corruption coalition booed him when he received the document. The second march was held in Cape Town.
A united stand against corruption. The message: boost efforts to combat corruption. The demands of the marchers include annual lifestyle audits of senior government officials, protection of whistleblowers and Chapter 9 institutions.
We're doing so not because we are angry against anybody, not because we're gaining any form of publicity, not because we have nothing else to do, not because we are stressed. We're doing so because we love our country, South Africa.
Minister Radebe accepted the memorandum on behalf of government. However, he was greeted with resounding boos.
Unite Against Corruption Coalition.
There's a law now that has been passed by Parliament and assented to by the President of it barring civil servants from doing business with government. So that's a reflection of our commitment in fighting the scourge of corruption.
Another anti-corruption march led by NUMSA and workers is on the cards for next month. Sepho Stirman, SABC News, Pretoria.
The Rhodes Must Fall movement at the University of Cape Town disrupted a lecture by the French economist Thomas Piketty yesterday. Now, due to Piketty missing his flight on Tuesday night, the lecture was scheduled to take place over Skype. But right before it started, members of the Rhodes Must Fall movement and other groupings came into the lecture room and disrupted proceedings. Piketty is scheduled to deliver a series of lectures before the 13th annual Nelson Mandela lecture on Saturday. He missed his plane because he reportedly did not have the required amounts of free pages in his passport. He's now expected to arrive in South Africa this morning. The Wits University Vice-Chancellor, Professor Adam Habib, says that government has no will to transform historically black universities. Now, he was speaking at the 8th Imam Abdullah Harun Memorial Lecture in Cape Town last night.
Imam Abdullah Harun, a Muslim cleric, a leader, and so much more. Brutally murdered, he died in detention. He is remembered for the sacrifices he made in ensuring that all live in harmony.
Would he not have asked why universities receive only 22 billion rand in subsidy when the government's own task team says that at the global average they should be funded at 37 billion rand? Would he not have asked why is it that so many of our institutions remain racial enclaves?
Privileged universities were also used as examples where black students still feel culturally ostracized, causing student upsurge.
The children of rich parents land up going to Wits, UCT, Stellenbosch. The ones who land up at Walter Sisulu, the University of Zululand, Fort Hare, tend to be the children of the poorest within our communities. And until now, government has lacked the will or the imagination, despite all of its political rhetoric, to develop these historically black universities.
The Imam Abdullah Harun Trust says it's doing all it can to change the lives of the underprivileged, but need more donors to come forward and assist. Nomawatu Solwandle, SABC News, Cape Town.
Staying with higher education, the University of KwaZulu-Natal has again suffered disruptions. Protest action on the Edgewood campus turned violent yesterday, and there were minor disruptions on the Pietermaritzburg campus. Academic activity at the university resumed on Monday following 2 weeks of closure due to violent protests. Students were unhappy over the termination of the Registration Appeals Committee, which was a forum for them to make arrangements for the payment of outstanding tuition fees while continuing with their studies. International news now. Senior UN officials have warned a high-level meeting on migration that unilateral policies will not address the challenges of international migration. And while there was a lack of consensus on what was forcing people to move, the calls for burden sharing appeared unanimous.
These now familiar scenes of people on the move, as the world grapples with how to bring a sense of hope to the millions now deemed helpless.
If we are united, we can do it. This may be a crisis of numbers, but I think it may be a crisis of global solidarity. If we have global solidarity, we can overcome these tragic scenes.
One thing we have to recognize is that proximity doesn't determine responsibility. The fact that you're beside a disaster doesn't mean that you're responsible for those who are involved in it.
Hungary, that has faced criticism over its handling of the problem, rejected the notion that this was purely a refugee crisis.
This is not a refugee crisis. This is a mass migratory movement composed of economic migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and also foreign fighters. This is an uncontrolled and unregulated process.
Hungary's Prime Minister also said they were encountering people from Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and most recently from sub-Saharan Africa at their border. Earlier, G7 countries and some Arab nations pledged $1.8 billion to the UN to deal with the migration crisis, with monies particularly earmarked for the World Food Programme and the UN Refugee Agency that is facing what it calls an explosion of forced migration. Shervin Bryceby's SABC News, New York.
Across the globe, locally, and on the entire continent. Every second, every minute, and every hour. There's always a breaking story. We commit to giving you the most important, significant, and interesting news. That's why it is not a surprise that more Africans are tuning to SABC News to find out what is happening. Because when news break, we've got you covered. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
Time now for your business news. Now, the National Union of Mine Workers Chief Negotiator Peter Bailey has confirmed that NUM will give coal companies a 48-hour strike notice. Now, last night, SABC News spoke to NUM Chief Negotiator Peter Bailey and asked him if he was not concerned that the strike could lead to mine workers ending up with nothing.
I think it's important that the public is not misled by the executives of these mining houses. Whether we go on strike or we don't, whether we say we don't want an increase or we do want an increase, two things are going to happen. They continue issuing Section 189s with the intent to retrench. Secondly, the executives and the CEOs are giving themselves massive bonuses and increases, irrespective of whether things are going good or bad. It is those poor black mine workers in the lower accolades who do not earn a decent salary to, in a dignified manner, support their families, keep their children at school, and put a plate of food every night on the table. And they are asked to tighten the belt when there is no figure left to tighten the belt in.
How much are those mine workers earning at the moment?
Here is the catch. Many of them are still below 5,000 rand. And do you think that's a decent living wage for a black mine worker who cannot, with dignity, provide for his family? Surely, 22 years after democracy, there has to be change in the mining sector. They've made a killing. Why did they not cater for rainy days?
Data released today is once again raising concerns about South Africa's vulnerability when it comes to trade relations with the rest of the world. Now, our reliance on imported goods has been a concern, and the trade deficit, which reflects the extent to which imports outstrip our exports, widened to nearly 10 billion rand in August. Now, that's from a revised shortfall of 1.11 billion rand in July. South Africa wants to export more to boost growth here at home and make the economy less susceptible to inflation from imported goods. But exports decreased by nearly 6%. while imports rose by 3.6% on a month-to-month basis. In other important data out today, the Reserve Bank reported that credit extension rose to 8.6% in August. That's compared to the same month last year. The private sector credit extension gauge has been slow to accelerate in recent years, due in part to a slowing economy. The city of Johannesburg is pushing for less cars on the road. The ecomobility festival aims to encourage commuters to look at alternative modes of transport. Now, it opens in Sandton tomorrow, and from Monday, parts of the Sandton precinct will be declared a car-free zone.
South African commuters spend more than 264 hours. That's almost 11 days stuck in their cars on the road. That's according to the TomTom Traffic Index. But with initiatives like the Eco-Mobility Festival, they could find themselves spending less time on the road and also helping the environment. Sandton sees more than 85,000 vehicles move in and out of the precinct daily. Despite the availability of public transport, the roads remain congested.
Part of the Eco-Mobility Festival is to seek ways of decongesting Sandton. So yes, we've got a number of very important and different activities. The first activity is where we're changing the use of certain streets, which will make it easier for people to use public transport and walk and cycle, and difficult to use a car.
With 120,000 people entering the area daily, this is not going to be an easy feat. Motorists will only be able to access some roads. There was mixed reaction to the plan.
I hope they get the bicycle tracks going and the walking promenades and everything. I think it's fabulous.
I intend to buy another car, not to go back to public transport.
Hopefully the traffic will flow and we won't have such stress in traffic anymore.
Eco-Mobility Month will run from the 1st of October for a month, so those going to Sandton may find it somewhat different. Hasina Gori, SABC News, Sandton.
And now time for News International. And let's start off with Central African Republic, who is pleading with the United Nations for support to restore peace and stability in the West African country. The country's interim president was forced to return to the country from the UN General Assembly in response to the worst violence this year to hit the capital, Bangui.
Hélas, au moment où nous sommes venus.
This situation clearly shows that peace and reconciliation are still fragile and require strong and supported action in order that my country will not once again be drawn into a vicious cycle of violence. So we ask the international community, and particularly the United Nations, to make it possible for there to be a stronger presence in the Central African Republic.
A desperate plea for an urgent intervention to bring about calm. Since the latest violence started a few days ago, almost 40 people are reported to have died in what is believed to be intercommunal clashes that raised doubt about plans to hold elections on the 18th of this month. UN has also warned that the Central African Republic could descend into a civil war unless the latest increase in violence in the unstable country is brought under control. The elections are aimed at restoring democracy to a country at the heart of Africa's fragile regions, following a rebellion. The country's president is yet to make a public statement following her return. Samba Panza has blamed the latest unrest on supporters of former President Francois Bozize, who was ousted in 2013 by mainly Muslim rebels who fought under the umbrella group Seleka.
The United States and Russian military will hold talks as soon as possible to avoid clashing during operations in Syria. That announcement came hours after Russia launched airstrikes in the country yesterday.
Secretary Carter stopped short of confirming that Russian warplanes had targeted anti-Assad forces in their strike on the Syrian city of Homs.
I want to be careful about confirming information, but it does appear that they were in areas where there probably were not ISIL forces, and that is precisely one of the problems with this whole approach.
He said the US position was clear, that a lasting defeat of the Islamic State and other extremist groups in Syria could only be achieved in parallel to a political restructuring in the country.
If Russia's recent actions and those now ongoing reflect a genuine commitment to defeat that organization, then we are prepared to welcome those efforts and to find a way to deconflict our operations and thereby multiply the military pressure on ISIL and affiliated groups. But we must not and will not be confused in our fight against ISIL with support for Assad.
The Defense Secretary has also strongly criticised the way that Russia informed the US of its plans to begin these airstrikes.
This is not the kind of behavior that we should expect professionally from the Russian military professionally, and that's one reason why I think it's a good thing to have an avenue of communication that is less unprofessional than a drop-in.
Kate Fisher, SABC News, Washington.
The Palestinian flag is flying high at the United Nations headquarters in New York for the very first time. The General Assembly decided last month that the non-member observer states, which include Palestine and the Vatican, should be allowed to fly their flags at its headquarters.
Ululation greeting the raising of the Palestinian standard, a symbolic gesture Palestinian leaders hope will show their people that the international community has not forgotten their cause. Earlier in the General Assembly, he declared they would no longer be bound by agreements with Israel, including the Oslo Accords.
As long as Israel is not committed to the signed agreements and undermined all agreements, we, for our part, are not committed to those agreements, and Israel must bear full responsibility for this development and this situation.
The 1993 pact provided a roadmap for the creation of a Palestinian state within 5 years. Abbas rebuked Israel for continued illegal settlement activities while pleading with the Security Council to act.
I also call on the Security Council and the General Assembly to uphold their responsibilities before it is too late.
Ending his remarks, he extended an olive branch to Israeli citizens.
It is my sincere hope that you will consider the dangerous reality on the ground and look to the future and accept for the Palestinian people, repeat, accept for the Palestinian people what you accept for yourselves. Then you will find that the achievement of peace will be possible and you will enjoy security, safety, peace and stability.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address the Assembly on Thursday. Shervin Brycepease, SABC News, New York.
Dozens of nations have signed on to a French proposal that the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council refrain from exercising their veto in cases of mass atrocities and genocide. 75 countries backed the proposal.
75 countries in Europe, Africa, Latin America and Asia back the proposal, and French officials say they expect more nations to join.
We hope there will be more commitments to ensure that these situations, like in Syria, but there are others where there are mass atrocities and the UN Security Council is paralyzed by a veto, disappear.
Fabius says France has already committed to not using its veto in case of mass atrocities and potential genocide. He hopes others will soon follow suit. France is one of the 5 permanent members with veto powers. None of the 4 other veto powers, the United States, China, Britain and Russia, have formally signed up for the initiative.
Health Talk, your show on health practice.
The people being empowered with knowledge so that they can change their behavior and reduce their risk of being sick.
How serious is stress at work?
If we don't address workplace stress, that negative stress, then it can lead to burnout and it can lead to depression.
How does absentees affect companies?
The one that's really problematic for employers is the one that is unscheduled.
How can companies organize their wellness program?
Health promotion mustn't just be a one-size-fits-all type of approach. It must be customized based on understanding of the unique needs of that particular organization.
For health tips that will help you to adopt healthy living with Dr. Sello Mutawung on Health Talk every Saturday.
Welcome back. I'm Kendall Makhamat and I've got your sports on Newsroom. Our top of our sports stories for today is Springbok coach Hanneke Meyer has named veteran scrum half Fourie du Preez as captain and made 3 changes to play Scotland in Rugby World Cup Pool B. This at St James's Park this coming Saturday. Du Preez replaced Jean de Villiers, who returned home with the broken jaw it suffered in the 46-6 win over Samoa. This is what he had to say on the occasion.
It's obviously a massive honour and privilege for me being asked to be captain. I had thought about it for the last 4 years. 2012 was in a similar situation, and very happy that I can get the opportunity now. I'm also very happy that a guy like Scott and Dwayne are very good friends of mine, and I'm sure they'll back me and I can do it with them. I'm not going to be a big speaker or motivational speaker or whatever. Hopefully I can lead from the front. And massive game. Coach talked about winning the World Cup, but only thinking about winning Scotland this weekend.
Onwards and upwards, and the second night of UEFA Champions League matches this week brought some respite for fans of English football, particularly those of the Manchester United bent. They ran out eventual 2-1 winners against Wolfsburg at Old Trafford. This as Ronaldo bagged a brace for Real Madrid against Malmo on the continent. Now here are highlights of some of the action.
And they're in here. Well, what a start by Wolfsburg. Caligiuri is the goal scorer. Manchester United cut apart. Oh, he's got past Rodriguez. And it should have been the equaliser from Wayne Rooney. Mata, problem for Wolfsburg here. Shouts for handball. Caligiuri, penalty given. It's 1-1. A terrific position for Young to cross from. Flick by Mata. Smalling! Well, he stayed up, and he got his reward, and Juan Mata cleverly gave him the chance.
Needs support, in it comes from Bazali. Morata! Juve in front, and it's Alvaro Morata. Scored the winning goal on match day 1 at Manchester City. Scores the opening goal here at the Juve Stadium. Oh, it breaks here for Zaza. Now has he got the pace to go all the way? Simone Zaza to wrap it up, yes! A huge roar around the Juventus Stadium. 3 points, signed, sealed and delivered.
Malmo have lost their defensive shape. It's Cristiano Ronaldo with all the time in the world to score. Malmo's game plan going out of the window. Lucas. And there's the touch from Ronaldo that draws him level with Raul, right at the top of Real Madrid's all-time goal-scoring charts. His and Real Madrid's second tonight, a record-equaling goal from Cristiano Ronaldo.
And Ronaldo will make hay while Messi is away. Let's have a look at some of the results from all of last night's action. First couple of matches being played, all pretty much around the same time, 8:45 last night. Real Madrid beating Malmo 2-0, and then PSG 3-0 against Shakhtar Donetsk. And Moscow are making home ground advantage count, beating PSV 3-2. Manchester United 2-1 winners against Wolfsburg. And City, if you see down to the bottom of that, they beat Mönchengladbach 2-1 as well. Astana 2-2 against Galatasaray. Atletico Madrid 1-2 against Benfica. And then Juventus, they beat Sevilla 2-0. And that's where we're going to leave it with the sports. Back now to Elvis.
Thank you, Kendall. Let's take a look at all your headlines now. Abatembu King Bulikaya Dalindyebo has been sentenced to 12 years in prison in the Bloemfontein Court of Appeals. Now, while the culpable homicide sentence of 10 years was set aside, he was sentenced to 5 years on 3 counts of arson and 7 counts of kidnapping, which were taken as one by the court, and he was sentenced to 1 year. About 80% of Pretoria's city bus routes have been severely affected by ongoing disruptions. This comes after Tshwane bus drivers, who are members of SAMWU, abandoned their shift. The city of Tshwane called for all bus drivers to sell tickets and carry cash. The Rhodes Must Fall movement, as well as other organizations at the University of Cape Town, disrupted a lecture by French economist Thomas Piketty yesterday. Now, due to Piketty missing his plane on Tuesday night, the lecture was scheduled to take place over Skype. But just before it started, members of the Rhodes Must Fall movement came into the lecture room and disrupted proceedings. Central African Republic is pleading with the United Nations for support to restore peace and stability in the West African country. President Catherine Samba-Panza was forced to return home early from the UN General Assembly in order to respond to the peak in violence in the capital, Bangui. Now, she has yet to make a public statement following her return. Now, those were all your top stories for this hour. Let us now cross live to the Communications Workers Union media briefing in Braamfontein.
The government should just rework the way the post office should function, other than bailing them out, only putting money, because if that's the approach that we want them to take, chances are even next year they will need another bailout, because workers have to be paid.
Any other question? No, thank you very much. You want to have a last say?
Yeah, I've just got a last question. It's probably a two-part question, but if you can sort of clarify your issue with WNS, just in terms of what your exact problem is there. And also, just as a left field question, if you can maybe provide comments on the recent announcement that Claudia Mutinen got a R1 million increase at the SABC. It would be interesting to get your views on that as well.
Okay, in that order, the leadership will respond.
No, let's try and respond to some of the questions which is raised. I think the leadership will tackle other questions which I might not respond to. Let's deal with the whole issue and put it into context, the issue of the mass action. The mass action is not only about Telkom. I think it deals with two parts of it. The one part is dealing with the Telkom, the current state of affairs. And obviously the march will not be to Telkom headquarters. It will be march to government, raising our dissatisfactions. I think our statement already clarifies. We want to call for the dismissal of Maseko. How do you march to Maseko and call for his dismissal? So we're marching to government. The march also entails the whole issue of the South African Post Office. It deals with the funding model not the funding model, but the bailout of the post office. The march talks about the current state of affairs in the post office. Also talks about the SIU report, which needs to be released. It also talks about the employment of these casuals in terms of which have been there for many years. I think you are the ones who know better the history of the casuals in the South African post office. Around the whole issue on WNS, I think it's important that we clarify. You'll recall when Telkom went into a transaction of Section 197, it was an automatic in terms of Section 197, and what then transpired is that the people were supposed to maintain all benefits in terms of what we had in terms of that collective agreement. Now we've been told that the following is that in WNS they want to talk about retrenching of workers. 2,
They're talking about reducing benefits of workers, and at the same time, they also want to relocate workers into different contexts. So I think that is what our fight is about, the issue of WNS. Around the issue of Claudia Motswaneng, I think it's important that we last week released a statement that we want the board to clarify the whole issue of the salary of the CEO of the COO at SABC. And in that context, we strongly believe that one is that the board is accountable in terms of remuneration. The board sets up policies, and obviously the board have responded. And furthermore, as Communication Workers Union, we still have a view that we as Communication Workers Union have set up a meeting, we want to have engaged the board so that there's some other issues we need to get clarity on, so that when we respond from an informed position around the whole issue on SABC Chief Operating Officer. The issue of the post office in terms of it's going into electronic, we agree with you, hence the turnaround strategy. If you look at the STP of the South African Post Office, it addresses the issue of an old letter which is sent by people in the rural areas conversing to the new systems in terms of electronics. So the post office new infrastructure turnaround strategy, hence we are calling for funding, because you can't have a turnaround strategy without funding, because if there's no funding, the post office will collapse more, and hence we are calling upon that STP, that turnaround strategy, be funded so that we can look at a new model for the South African Post Office. I think on the other issues, the leadership will respond.
No, thank you very much. I think on the question of the set-top boxes and being imported from China, NAMEC, and so forth, I think you'd have heard us were welcoming the placement of import duty of 15%, so that as and when there is an agreement in terms of import, there is a placement of duty that will secure the country in terms of the funding of the set-top boxes itself. So that in itself secures, move around really needing into the country. We have seen those examples, for example, like in Botswana, when it moves to digital migration, as people were flocking in, putting those set-top boxes that did not meet the standards. So we are happy and we welcome that process, and we are very vigilant that this 2.4 billion rands that has been injected, it must benefit those who are coming from the poor background or the poor disadvantaged communities, as you may like. So in that instance, as CW, you will be very vigilant to say what is it that is done over and above that just making an agreement and the announcement. I think it's important also to clarify on the question of South African Post Office. Even to send, currently now, the government is spending over 20 billion rands on Korea, but on the private sector. We believe that if that business was brought to South African Post Office, that on its own, it's a bailout. However, we want to go beyond that you'll recall that the once corrupt Board of Post Office that we removed ourselves was also using the subsidy of government as a profit. And that created a problem. Now, for CASA to stop that subsidy was on the basis that it was reported as a profit. And now going forward, we want that subsidy to come back, because for a poor child, for a poor worker, for a poor unemployed person to post a letter from Cape Town to Polokwane, it costs them around 5 rands. But when you go to the private sector, it costs them around 50 rands. However, we expect efficient delivery service from the post office. It cannot be possible without that particular service, because post office currently is offering a service almost for free. I think those are the questions. But the last question on the question of workers of Telkom who are members of CW. First, we expect every member of CW to be participating in this process. Our members knows that this retrenchment is not only targeting a certain people, but they know that it's targeting their jobs in totality. But we don't end there with this march. We are saying that the entire ICT is facing challenges. We can go to ETV, we have problems there. We can go to various other institutions, we have problems there. So as we have highlighted, this march must constitute of a massive number of CW members. At currently, we expect more than 24,000 members to participate there. How long it will be, whether it will be protected, yes, we believe that our members must be protected in any action that we embark on. That's the first point. How long it will be, at this point in time, we want to fire the first shot and say we are marching, we'll wait for the government and all the relevant stakeholders to respond. After that, we'll then reconsider our position, what do we do next. Thanks.
Teachers? Okay, well, thank you very much. With those responses, we will take a second wave of questions, or if there are any other clarity-seeking questions. Gareth, in the same spirit. Any clarity-seeking questions? Let me start this side, man, with Hulisani.
I don't think my DTT question was answered. I'll use a practical example. The allegation is that there are certain people who are importing the products from China, but what they're going to do is to say made in South Africa, though the product is made in China. So this thing, if it's coming illegally, then there's no import tax or whatnot. So it's going to kill jobs, because if Altec is producing in South Africa, the workers of Altec are not going to get set-top boxes to produce, because already there are companies that are buying these things from China, but they'll present to government to say we've manufactured them here. That there are allegations around the 70 set-top boxes right now as we speak. 70,000.
Okay. Bunol.
Again, on the rolling invest action in the ICT sector, will this much be supported by other such European unions, and who else is this going to control in the march? And do you have an estimation as to when exactly will the date of this march?
Gareth?
Just one more question. There was the big sort of march against corruption yesterday in Victoria, and the CWU didn't take part. Are you able to explain why not? Is there a sort of fracture within COSATU?
I'm not leadership already. In the same sequence again, I'll start with the president.
Well, let me try and attempt to respond to one question in terms of the rolling mass action and when it becomes. I think our National Executive Committee have given the administration work to be done by the National Office Bearers, that before end of October there must be a march in the ICT sector, in which we are currently busy dealing with that. But significant out of this march is to highlight where we believe strongly that our gains which we have gained after 1994 cannot singled out, where I think if you've read in our statement, we make reflection on Telkom reversing the gains of the Employment Equity Act. Telkom wants to reverse the gains by saying that they don't want to recognize unions anymore in Telkom. This was publicly said by the CEO, that he doesn't want unions. He wants to play by the rules of the law, but there must be no unions. And I think as Communication Workers Union, it's a fight which we can't leave unattended. Who's going to support the march? I think CWU is affiliated to COSATU. And CWU will be marching as Communication Workers Union. And if our allies want to join us, they'll obviously do that at their own time, where they'll normally give solidarity and support to us as an organization. So it's our march, and whoever wants to join us as our allies as COSATU, they know how to do in terms of solidarity. I think that's what we normally do, and we are not going to do it differently than we've always been doing it. I think the comrades will respond to the other questions.
Okay. On the question of the set-top boxes illegally imported into the country, I think we call upon to all South Africans who have such information to bring it forward so that we can be able to respond accordingly. Amongst other things, to take the matter to authorities, because we'll be very worried if our jobs could be compromised because there is some fraudulent activities in that part. So we'll act very vigilant around that question. We also know that there's also those companies who will import products and assemble digital boxes in South Africa. There's also that allegation. So we think that the authorities such as SABC will stamp its authority and assess those type of things. It's very important. I think on the question of corruption, we all know CW stands by now. I mean, it took us over 16 months to remove a corrupt board in the South African Post Office, including calling off of some executives to be removed. It was CW that championed a very vigilant strike at Sambro to remove a CEO that we alleged around corruption. Not long ago, we marched to Union Building, raising issues of corruption around our sector. We are again doing the same, and we are saying that in Telkom, there is a corruption in terms of appointing that consultant, which is called Baines. We are saying that we want to step up on the fight against corruption, and I think everyone knows that CW has been vocal around the issues of corruption. Perhaps one direct question was that what is it that we have said on the march against corruption taking place yesterday? CW did not pronounce on it. It was a march that had taken place today, but we wanted to emphasize that our position is a principled position around corruption that has to unfold. Thanks.
Committee Chairs? We are going to. Okay, thank you very much. Jason. I thought you were sorted.
Yeah, I think the question was direct on the issue of why not take part in yesterday's corruption march. We are an affiliate of COSATU, and we are bound and we prefer to deal with socio-economic related matters through the federation, so that we can get the necessary support in line with the principle of an injury to one is an injury to all. Our not participating yesterday, as the GS has just indicated, does not mean that we are not against corruption. We are against corruption. It's just a question of a tactic to say, this is how we must deal with it. Thank you very much.
We are going to be generous and allow you to have a last bite, if there's any. Then from there on, we are closing. The very same sequence again. If there's none, okay, Gareth?
I've just got one question. I have a very small detail about the mass march. So are you specifically going to go to particular government departments, like the communications departments or the telecoms departments? What is your plan with that march in terms of the location that you guys are going to be marching to?
No, actually, our target will be very broad. Firstly, we won't have one march in one province. We're expecting to have marches all over the country. A number of institutions will be targeted. One is government, and two, remember, we've been crying and saying that the public protector is not forwarding that report around post office. So it will be one institution that will be targeted. We've also deemed it necessary that we target those economic hubs because workers are exploited. When you talk about conversion of workers to permanent position, workers are exploited, including journalists who are working as freelancers and so on and so forth. So there will be various institutions that we are targeting to attend to that particular objective of the NECS applied. Thanks.
Yeah, on behalf of the leadership, we want to thank you for responding positively to the invite, and we also expect to see you on the march because it also speaks directly to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. You'll be working plus marching.
You'll be working plus marching.
So you won't be no pay, won't apply. Taking. That's right.
destroys my water like nobody's business.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, gentlemen.
SABC News brings you the 13th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, delivered by one of the most influential and important thinkers of our time. He's the French economist everyone's talking about, author of the unlikely bestseller Capital in the 21st Century, the man they call the modern Karl Marx. Don't miss Professor Thomas Piketty on SABC 2, DSTV 404 and SAFM, Saturday 3rd October at 2.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
We live in a digital era, and the number of Africans with mobile phones is rapidly increasing.
Twitter use is predominantly being done on smartphones. This is a very African phenomenon.
Here, there are constantly new innovative ways to make the internet more affordable. With that, we're seeing protests against governments proposing methods to limit access. On Network, we give you information about all of this. We also have new computers, games, and robots.
Join Siphumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 19:30 CAT.
The act of travel is an eye-opening activity that not only expands your view but is a major part of any country's economy. South Africa's spectacular scenery, friendly people and world-class infrastructure make it one of the most desired destinations in the world. Despite tough global economic conditions, the tourism sector is steadily growing. But the idea that one has to go far in order to explore is quickly changing as the sector encourages local exploration. South Africa's history has been one of confrontation, but is now also known as one of reconciliation. World-class sites have been established to commemorate the country's past and celebrate its newfound unity. An area of tourism that is often overlooked is the question of the arts and tourism. Although many cities have not taken advantage of this element to attract international visitors, the domestic artistic tourism is fast becoming a key drawcard for local exploration. A-grade exhibition centers are creating modern spaces to showcase what makes up the African expression. A good dose of creative capital is playing a major role as entrepreneurs create new and exciting ways to sell their products, thus creating new vibrant local spaces that are changing the face of our communities. South Africa has earmarked tourism as a key sector with excellent potential for growth, and a vast amount is being poured into changing the face of our spaces, making them vibrant, urban, and exciting.
When bees and wasps sting a person, they inject a bitterness venom in their skins.
We have about 3 spider species in South Africa that we have to worry about. Button spiders, which include, the black widow spiders, your sac spiders, and your violent spiders.
That venom is in your system, it's in your muscle tissue. And the more your heart